Chapter 1912. Chu Fengmian had obtained a large number of treasures from the treasury of the Linlang dynasty. Although most of the treasures were not of much use to Chu Fengmian, it was still a shocking amount of wealth. Although Chu Fengmian had lied about obtaining a divine-grade spirit stone vein, if he were to use divine-grade spirit stones in every transaction, there was a chance that others would suspect him. After all, even if Chu Fengmian had obtained a divine-grade spiritual stone vein, the divine-grade spiritual stones in it could not be endless. Selling a batch of items at this time could also replenish Chu Fengmian's wealth and avoid suspicion. It is said that the 14th young master has accepted a suicide mission to eliminate the Linlang dynasty. It seems like he has gained something. After hearing Chu Fengmian's words, the Oblivion Sea King thought for a moment and suddenly said, "The Lunar Ocean Merchant Guild was one of the largest merchant guilds in Jianwang City. They also had their own information network to buy and sell information. The news of Chu Fengmian swaggering and accepting a suicide mission in the Sea Sword sect had already spread. Now, he had also heard about it. However, the Oblivion Sea King did not think that Chu Fengmian had the ability to eliminate the Linlang dynasty. In the Linlang dynasty, it would be difficult for him to deal with Linlang Jie alone. Moreover, if he wanted to eliminate the Linlang dynasty, he would have to enter the chaotic ocean and go to the Linlang dynasty's lair. Even a few half-step celestial realm experts would not dare to attempt to extinguish the Linlang dynasty's innumerable demon path experts in the Linlang dynasty. The Oblivion Sea King's words were filled with suspicion. Chu Fengmian also heard the suspicion in the Oblivion Sea King's words. He smiled and said proudly, "That's right. The Linlang dynasty has been destroyed by me. I want to sell a batch of items from the Linlang dynasty's treasury." "What? The Linlang dynasty has really been eliminated by the 14th young master?" The Oblivion Sea King was shocked when he heard this. He thought that Chu Fengmian's limit was to kill a few demon venerables of the Linlang dynasty. However, Chu Fengmian said that he had completely eliminated the Linlang dynasty and obtained the treasury of the Linlang dynasty. "It's just the Linlang dynasty. It's nothing." Looking at the Oblivion Sea King's shocked expression, Chu Fengmian smiled casually, giving off an unfathomable feeling. "How many treasures are there in here? Why don't you count them?" Chu Fengmian waved his hand, and an empty ring flew toward the Oblivion Sea King. The moment the Oblivion Sea King opened the spatial ring, his expression changed, and he was shocked. Inside this empty ring, there was a dazzling array of spirit stones, spirit herbs, spirit pills, spirit weapons, heavenly wondrous items, and countless materials. It was simply piled up into a mountain. With so many of them, it was practically a sect's stockpile. With so many treasures, it was definitely enough to support the consumption of a sect. If Chu Fengmian wanted to, he could even start a sect in the Songhai star field. This is the Sea Overturning Pagoda? It is said that it used to be the most precious treasure of the Overturned Sea sect. Later on, the Overturned Sea Pagoda fell into the hands of the Glittering Jewel dynasty. The Oblivion Sea Monarch said in shock as he took out a 7-story blue pagoda from the spatial ring. This is really the treasury of the Glittering Jewel dynasty?" The Oblivion Sea King originally thought that Chu Fengmian's words were somewhat boastful. After all, the Glittering Jewel dynasty was a force that several half-step celestial realm experts might not be able to defeat even if they joined forces. But now, this empty ring really contained the treasury of the Glittering Jewel dynasty. The Glittering Jewel dynasty was really destroyed by Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's words were not false at all. Even the Oblivion Sea King, who had seen countless storms, was a little stunned at this moment. The Glittering Jewel dynasty that had stirred up countless storms and storms of blood was destroyed just like that today? Oblivion Sea King, please count quickly. Chu Fengmian looked at the Oblivion Sea King's shocked expression and said with a smile. After dealing with the matters of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm, Chu Fengmian would leave and return to the Sea Sword sect to submit the task. "All right, Although the Oblivion Sea King was shocked, he quickly reacted after hearing Chu Fengmian's words. He suddenly threw out a jade talisman, and in a short while, a dozen figures came into the room. These figures were the stewards of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm. There were so many things in the empty ring that the Oblivion Sea King alone could not count them all. Countless sacred herbs and sacred elixirs were released from the empty ring, and they piled up into mountains in the room. The stewards of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm had seen many treasures in their daily lives, but they were still stunned. The glittering jewel dynasty had been established for thousands of years, and the number of treasures it had accumulated was astronomical. Now, all of them were piled up in the room. "Count them quickly," the Oblivion Sea King shouted coldly. The stewards of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm woke up from their daze and hurriedly counted the treasures. The stewards of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm counted quickly. In less than half an hour, all the treasures were counted by them. 210 ancient sacred herbs, 3,900 sacred herbs. Among them, there are 100 ancient sacred herbs. After a manager finished checking all the items, he came forward to report to Wang Chong. "You don't have to say so much. The total value is in divine-grade spirit stones." Chu Fengmian waved his hand and said directly. These treasures were useless to him, so he would sell them all at once. In divine-grade spirit stones, the total value is 40,000 divine-grade spirit stones. The steward glanced at Chu Fengmian and replied. This number shocked him. The Moon Ocean Commerce Firm had not done such a big business for many years. 40,000 divine-grade spirit stones. 40,000. Sure, I'll sell them all to the Lunar Ocean Merchant Group. 40,000 divine-grade spirit stones was equivalent to the value of 400 immortal stones. The wealth in the glittering Jewel Dynasty treasury was more than Chu Fengmian had imagined. This was the remaining treasures after Chu Fengmian had taken away some of the most precious treasures in the treasury. After all, ancient sacred elixirs like the divine Elephant Dark Strength Elixir were not something that could be bought with money. Chu Fengmian would not sell them either. Chu Fengmian kept all the things that were useful to him. If other things were included, this number would be multiplied by several times. Take them away, count them, and put them in the warehouse. The Oblivion Sea King heard Chu Fengmian's words and said. The stewards nodded and hurriedly sorted out the various treasures that had been piled up into a mountain. They put them all into their spatial rings and then left one after another. Genius memorized this site's address in a second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1913. 14th Young Master, are you going to settle the bill now? The Oblivion Sea King looked at Chu Fengmian and said. Now, he looked at Chu Fengmian with even more respect. Although he was a half-step celestial realm powerhouse, it was impossible for him to annihilate the glittering Jewel Dynasty. Just Linlang Jie alone was already extremely troublesome for the Oblivion Sea King to deal with. Like the Oblivion Sea King, Linlang Jie was a veteran expert in the Shanghai Star Zone. She had countless trump cards in her hands. If they were to fight outside, the Oblivion Sea King might stand a chance. However, if they were to fight in the Glittering Jewel Dynasty, where Glittering Jewel Jie's lair had countless trump cards, it would be extremely difficult for the Oblivion Sea King to escape unscathed if he were to go alone. But now, Chu Fengmian had single-handedly annihilated the Glittering Jewel Dynasty. Although Chu Fengmian was still in the realm of the Nine Tribulations Emperor Gu, his true strength was even more terrifying than his own. It seemed that Chu Fengmian's strength was not inferior to the Sea Sword Sect's third young master, Hai Chang'e. He definitely had the strength to compete for the position of sect master. He was trying to rope them in now because he had plans for the future. There's no hurry. I still need to buy some things. Chu Fengmian said slowly. I've obtained a batch of elixir recipes from the treasury of the Linlang dynasty. I'm preparing to refine a batch of divine elixir pills. When Chu Fengmian spoke, he waved his hand and a jade talisman appeared in his palm. It flew toward the Oblivion Sea King. What was recorded in the Jade Talisman were the 9 holy medicines needed to refine the small flying immortal pill. If Chu Fengmian wanted to step into the half-step celestial realm, he needed not just 1 or 2 flying immortal pills, but a large number of them. Although he had some holy medicines needed to refine small flying immortal Dan, he still didn't have many. If he could buy them, he would need to buy them in large quantities. Chu Fengmian had just sold the entire treasury of the glittering jewel dynasty in one go and obtained a large amount of wealth. Even if Chu Fengmian were to squander it now, it would not arouse anyone's suspicions. Furthermore, the flying immortal pill wasn't only useful to Chu Fengmian. It was also very useful to the people around Chu Fengmian. When Chu Fengmian returned to the 9 regions, he could give it to others. If it really didn't work, this small flying immortal pill would definitely make countless half-step celestial realm experts fight over it. For the half-step celestial realm experts who wanted to break through the Deva Major Tribulation, the small flying immortal pill, which could increase the success rate of breaking through, was something they would fight for no matter what. Even if it could increase their chances by 1%, it was enough for them to fight for it. Chu Fengmian concocted the small flying immortal pill. He wouldn't lose out no matter what. Of course, he would buy as many materials as he could. These materials? The Oblivion Sea King took the Jade Talisman and injected his spiritual energy into it. The names of the sacred medicines appeared one after another. The Oblivion Sea King was one of the consecrators of the Lunar Ocean Merchant Guild. He had done many transactions before, so he was very familiar with the names of these sacred herbs. The Oblivion Sea King carefully looked at the various materials recorded in the Jade Talisman. The first few items were still fine, but the further he looked, the uglier his expression became. 14th Young Master, even our Moon Ocean Commerce firm can't gather so many ancient sacred herbs. The Oblivion Sea King hesitated for a moment, then looked at Chu Fengmian and said. He had the intention of befriending Chu Fengmian, so he originally thought that even if Chu Fengmian wanted to buy some extremely precious sacred herbs, he might as well sell them to Chu Fengmian to befriend him. However, in the pill formula, the first few were still fine as they were considered ordinary sacred herbs, but the dozens of ancient sacred herbs at the back made him feel extremely helpless. They were ancient sacred herbs. Even if one of them appeared in the world, it would be enough to hold an auction and attract the experts of the vast sea star zone and even the countless surrounding star zones to fight for it. The Oblivion Sea King had only seen the names of the ancient sacred herbs recorded by Chu Fengmian in ancient books. He had never even heard of them appearing in the world. It doesn't matter. I'll buy as many as you can. Chu Fengmian looked at the Oblivion Sea King and said with a smile. In the Jade Talisman, other than the 9 sacred herbs needed to refine the lesser flying immortal pill, Chu Fengmian also wrote down many of the ancient sacred herbs needed to refine the flying immortal nirvana pill. The effect of 1 flying immortal nirvana pill was much stronger than 1,000 lesser flying immortal pills. Chu Fengmian was very confident that he could break through to the sky realm with just 1 pill. Therefore, Chu Fengmian wanted to try collecting the ingredients needed to refine the flying immortal nirvana pill. Chu Fengmian originally didn't think that the Moon Ocean Commerce firm would have such ancient sacred herbs. However, after listening to the Oblivion Sea King's words, the Moon Ocean Commerce firm really did have a few ancient sacred herbs needed to refine the flying immortal nirvana pill. This made Chu Fengmian feel that he had underestimated the Moon Ocean Commerce firm. They even had ancient sacred herbs. Many of these sacred herbs are in the Moon Ocean Commerce firm's warehouse. This old man needs to confirm it. The Oblivion Sea King looked up at Chu Fengmian after reading the Jade Talisman. There were too many types of sacred herbs recorded in the Jade Talisman, so he couldn't confirm it immediately. All right. Chu Fengmian nodded. The Oblivion Sea King's figure flickered and left the room. Chu Fengmian sat on a chair in the room, quietly drinking tea. He seemed to be waiting. However, Chu Fengmian quietly spread out his spiritual consciousness to investigate the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm. The Moon Ocean Commerce Firm had more secrets than Chu Fengmian had imagined. Ancient sacred herbs. Even the Sea Sword sect didn't have many of them. Even if the Sea Sword sect had obtained some ancient sacred herbs, they would have been divided up by the ancestors of the sect. It was impossible for them to be kept. Chu Fengmian released his spiritual consciousness and found the Oblivion Sea King at a glance. The Oblivion Sea King didn't go to the warehouse as he had said. Instead, he went all the way to the depths of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm's space. He looked anxious as if he wanted to meet someone. The Oblivion Sea King wants to meet someone? Chu Fengmian looked at the Oblivion Sea King's actions and sneered. However, he didn't act rashly and continued to follow the Oblivion Sea King with his spiritual consciousness. He watched the Oblivion Sea King enter the deepest room of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm. A middle-aged man was sitting in the room. When the Oblivion Sea King entered the room, he was incomparably respectful to the middle-aged man. This man is the shopkeeper of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm? Chu Fengmian saw the Oblivion Sea King's actions through his spiritual consciousness and roughly guessed the identity of the middle-aged man. Only the shopkeeper of the Moon Ocean Commerce Firm could make the Oblivion Sea King act so respectfully. Genius memorized this site's address in a second. Mobile reading website M. Chapter 1914. The shopkeeper of the Lunar Ocean Chamber of Commerce was rumored to be mysterious. Even Hai Shirsi had never seen him before. The moment Chu Fengmian saw this middle-aged man, his eyes revealed a bit of seriousness and fear. The middle-aged man was very strong. He was almost as strong as the Mad Dragon Emperor who had not passed the Deva tribulation. After all, when the Mad Dragon Emperor recovered from his injuries, he transcended the Deva tribulation and became an immortal. The middle-aged man in front of him was the same. If he wanted to pass the Deva tribulation, it would be a piece of cake. Chu Fengmian did not expect that there was such a master hidden in the Lunar Ocean Chamber of Commerce. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian did not make a scene in the chamber. Otherwise, it would be difficult to clean up the mess. Even Chu Fengmian did not have much hope of defeating the middle-aged man. Chu Fengmian was confident that he could escape unscathed from the middle-aged man, but he did not have much confidence in defeating the middle-aged man. After all, in terms of strength, although the middle-aged man was still a half-step Deva realm, his combat strength was close to the real Deva realm. Moreover, the middle-aged man was different from the Mad Dragon Emperor. The Mad Dragon Emperor was injured and suppressed his cultivation, so he did not trigger the Deva tribulation. As for that middle-aged man, he had managed to accomplish that through some sort of mysterious means. If the middle-aged man was willing to stop suppressing his cultivation, he could almost burst out with strength that was not inferior to the real Deva realm. Seems like I've underestimated the experts of this world. I thought that the young Emperor and Heavenly King Huang were already at the peak of the half-step celestial being realm. Whether it's the Mad Dragon Emperor or this middle-aged man, they are much stronger than the two of them. Chu Fengmian sighed in his heart. If it were not for this trip to the vast sea star field, Chu Fengmian would not have imagined that a half-step Deva realm master could be so powerful. The half-step Deva realm could be said to be the last realm of the Emperor realm. It was the realm closest to the Deva realm. However, the difference in strength between half-step Deva realm masters was like heaven and earth. The middle-aged man's strength was so great that even 100 ordinary half-step Deva realm masters, including the Oblivion Sea King and Linlang Jie, might not be a match for him. This gap was even greater than any of the previous realms. Fortunately, the middle-aged man was not a real expert in the celestial being realm. Although Chu Fengmian's spiritual sense was strong, such exploration could not be hidden from an expert in the celestial being realm. Therefore, Chu Fengmian didn't dare to wantonly explore the Sea Sword sect. Although the middle-aged man's strength was enough to pass the celestial tribulation at any time and was not inferior to the real celestial realm, after all, He had not broken through and could not detect Chu Fengmian's spiritual sense. This also allowed Chu Fengmian to properly probe the middle-aged man's strength. However, Chu Fengmian didn't dare to go overboard. Such an expert must have countless mysterious means. Chu Fengmian didn't dare to truly probe the middle-aged man's strength. He could only observe from afar. Is this person planning to condense an immortal true body? Chu Fengmian sized him up and saw the reason why the man had been suppressing his cultivation base and didn't want to transcend the Deva tribulation. Undying true body. This middle-aged man also wanted to condense an undying true body, and he was already similar to Heavenly King Huang. His flesh and blood had already condensed into 129,600 blood and flesh crystals. He could be considered to have touched the threshold of an undying true body. However, Chu Fengmian was well aware of how difficult it was to achieve a true undying true body from this step. Without external help, this middle-aged man couldn't even condense an embryonic form, let alone an undying true body. Transcending the Deva tribulation with an undying true body would bring great benefit. No one knew what these benefits were, but almost every person who had transcended the tribulation with an undying true body would achieve great things in the future. This middle-aged man obviously wanted the same, which was why he had been suppressing his cultivation base. He didn't even show his face to avoid provoking the Deva tribulation by fighting with others. Lord Moon, the 14th prince, is here again. He destroyed the Linlang dynasty and seized its treasury to sell to Moon Ocean Merchant Guild. The Oblivion Sea King entered the room, bowed, and respectfully said to Lord Moon in front of him. He also wants to buy a batch of sacred herbs, but many of them are precious ancient sacred herbs. I have no right to decide, so I can only ask Lord Moon to make the decision. What fortuitous encounter did this High Shirsi obtain? He actually managed to destroy the Linlang dynasty? Lord Moon was slightly startled when he heard the Oblivion Sea King's report. He knew how strong the Linlang dynasty was, but he had not expected it to be destroyed by High Shirsi. The 14th prince obtained some kind of fortuitous encounter, and his strength suddenly soared. Previously, he also defeated the 13th prince in one move. The Oblivion Sea King answered. The matter of Chu Fengmian defeating High Shirsi in one move outside the Seasword sect could not be hidden from the Moon Ocean Merchant Guild's intelligence network. Naturally, the Oblivion Sea King knew about it. It is said that the 14th prince went to Gu Hai and obtained an fortuitous encounter there. Went to Gu Hai? Fortuitous encounter in Gu Hai? A strange smile appeared on the corner of Lord Yu's mouth when he heard this. He immediately laughed out loud. Impossible. This High Shirsi definitely did not go to Gu Hai. Although he did obtain an fortuitous encounter, this so-called fortuitous encounter in Gu Hai is definitely fake. However, that is what the outside world is saying. Furthermore, I feel that this is the only possibility. The Oblivion Sea King hesitated for a moment before answering. 14th young master, you obtained an entire divine-grade spirit stone mine. So what if it is a divine-grade spirit stone vein? Aside from Gu Hai, it is not like there are no other places. This High Shirsi could have gone anywhere, but he definitely did not go to Gu Hai. He does not have the aura of Gu Hai on him. Lord Yu sneered. It looks like this little fellow has some unknown fortuitous encounter. However, it does not matter. In any case, we will not make an enemy out of him. If he has some fortuitous encounter, so be it. Bring me the list of herbs that the brat wants. Lord Moon waved his hand, and the Oblivion Sea King handed the jade talisman over. Interesting. Interesting. This brat is actually planning to refine the flying immortal nirvana pill? Lord Yu took a careful look at the inventory and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He is so young, yet he has such bold thoughts? Flying immortal nirvana pill? What kind of medicinal pill is that? The Oblivion Sea King asked in surprise when he heard the name. End of this chapter. Chapter 1915. The Oblivion Sea King was considered a veteran expert in the Shanghai star field. He had been around for thousands of years and had seen many things. However, he had never heard of such a pill. The Flying Immortal Nirvana Pill was once known as the #1 sacred pill in the ancient times. It is not inferior to an immortal pill, Lord Moon said in a deep voice. There was a hint of desire in her voice. A single Flying Immortal Nirvana Pill is enough to help a half-step celestial being, martial artist, or demon god to ascend to immortality. Is there really such a divine pill in the world? The Oblivion Sea King trembled and said in shock. Although Lord, you had only described the Nirvana elixir in a few words, just this Nirvana elixir alone was enough to help a half-step celestial realm elite to pass through the celestial tribulation and become an immortal. The title of the #1 sacred elixir was not an exaggeration. Yes, but this sacred pill has been lost for a long time. Even the pill formula has disappeared. Lord Moon seemed to be more knowledgeable than the Oblivion Sea King. She knew the secret. Is Hai Shirsi planning to refine the Flying Immortal Nirvana Pill? The Oblivion Sea King was shocked when he thought of the sacred medicine that Chu Fengmian wanted to buy. He guessed that the jade talisman that Chu Fengmian gave him recorded many ancient sacred medicines. The pill that Chu Fengmian wanted to refine would not be an ordinary pill. However, he did not expect Chu Fengmian to have such a big appetite to refine the #1 sacred pill. That brat does have such a plan. However, how could it be that easy for him to concoct the Flying Immortal Nirvana elixir? That brat must have obtained the pill formula for the Flying Immortal Nirvana elixir from the glittering jewel 3 demons. Lord Moon sneered and said, the Flying Immortal Nirvana Pill is the #1 sacred pill in the world. It is not easy to refine it. Although I do not know the pill formula, it is said that the Flying Immortal Nirvana Pill requires 99 sacred medicines. All of them are ancient sacred medicines without exception. This kid has the intention, but unfortunately, he does not have the ability. Then, Lord Yu, should we sell these sacred medicines? The Oblivion Sea King asked carefully. There were not many ancient sacred medicines in the Moon Ocean merchant firm. Each of them was not easy to obtain and would not be sold normally. These ancient sacred medicines, no matter which old antique they were sold to, they would owe them a favor. Sell, of course I'll sell. If there's a business, I'll do it. Lord Moon thought for a moment and said. However, since that brat destroyed the Linlang dynasty, he must have some good stuff in his hands. Tell him that I want 3 divine elephant profound strength pills from him. As long as he is willing to sell them, we can give him any sacred medicine that he wants as long as we have it. See? Yes. The Oblivion Sea King bowed respectfully and left the room. Divine Elephant Profound Strength Pill? It seems that this Lord Yu knows quite a bit. He even knows about the Divine Elephant Profound Energy Pellet in the glittering Jewel 3 Demons treasury. After the Oblivion Sea King left, Chu Fengmian withdrew his spirit sense and thought to himself. Of the moon was. The sea was. There were still 8 pills left. Chu Fengmian had originally planned to give them to Luo Shi, Han Yueli, and the others when they returned to the 9 regions. Now, he didn't expect that he would be targeted. Chu Fengmian was willing to sell the Divine Elephant Dark Energy Pills. However, he would only do so if there were enough benefit. 14th Young Master, sorry to keep you waiting. The Oblivion Sea King returned to the room after a while. He looked at Chu Fengmian and said apologetically. The warehouse was too messy. I was delayed. It's okay. Do you have all the sacred medicines I want? Chu Fengmian did not expose the Oblivion Sea King's words and asked casually. The Moon Ocean merchant firm has the first 9 sacred medicines. However, the last few ancient sacred medicines belong to a senior in the Moon Ocean merchant firm. This senior is also selling them, but he is not willing to sell them with spiritual stones. He wants to exchange them for a sacred pill called the Divine Elephant Dark Energy Pill, the Oblivion Sea King said while observing Chu Fengmian's every move. Divine Elephant Dark Energy Pill? It seems that this senior of the Moon Ocean merchant firm is well informed, Chu Fengmian said with a smile on his face. In that case, how about letting me meet this senior of the Moon Ocean merchant firm? Hearing this, the Oblivion Sea King's face showed a little embarrassment. This senior of the Moon Ocean merchant firm has a strange temper. He is not willing to meet outsiders. Not willing to give an opinion? Chu Fengmian smiled and suddenly took a step forward. His eyes turned cold as a shocking sword intent burst out and shrouded Chu Fengmian's body. Boom! The moment the shocking sword intent burst out, the Oblivion Sea King felt a sense of crisis. He retreated with fear in his heart. Even with his half-step celestial realm cultivation, he could not help but feel fear when facing Chu Fengmian's sword intent. 14th Young Master, what are you doing? The Oblivion Sea King stared at Chu Fengmian and said coldly. What? You don't want to meet me? Chu Fengmian ignored the Oblivion Sea King and said to Lord Moon. Since Lord Moon was the shopkeeper of the Moon Ocean merchant firm, everything that happened here could not be hidden from him. 14th Young Master, there is no need to be angry. A light voice resounded in the air. It was Lord Moon who spoke. Since the 14th Young Master wants to meet me, then let's meet. Oblivion, bring the 14th Young Master here. The voice dissipated as soon as it finished speaking. The Oblivion Sea King finally let out a sigh of relief when Chu Fengmian dispersed his sword intent. What kind of amazing fortuitous encounter did Hai Shirsi get? Even Hai Chang'e did not have such an imposing manner. If this person has been hiding his strength, then he has hidden it too deeply. The Oblivion Sea King looked at Chu Fengmian and could not help but think. In terms of cultivation realm, Chu Fengmian was only the 9 Tribulations Emperor Gu, while he was a half-step celestial realm expert. However, under the shroud of the shocking sword intent, the Oblivion Sea King felt an irresistible fear. If he resisted, he would be the only one who would die. 14th Young Master, please. The Oblivion Sea King did not dare to say anything. He made a gesture to Chu Fengmian and stepped into the depths of the Moon Ocean merchant firm. Chu Fengmian followed closely behind. After passing through countless spaces, they finally arrived at the deepest space of the Moon Ocean merchant firm. This was where Lord Moon was. My lord, I have brought him here, the Oblivion Sea King said respectfully as he looked at Lord Moon. You may leave. As soon as Lord Moon spoke, the Oblivion Sea King felt relieved and hurriedly left. The feeling that Chu Fengmian gave him was so strange that he did not want to face Chu Fengmian. End of chapter. Chapter 1916. Why do you want to see me? Lord, you didn't seem surprised to see Chu Fengmian. He casually looked at Chu Fengmian and asked. Since you're here, there's no need to hide. If you're not Hai Shirsi, who are you? When Lord Yu spoke, his gaze swept over Chu Fengmian. His gaze seemed to want to see through everything about Chu Fengmian. Under this gaze, even if it was an expert who was half a step away from the celestial being realm, all their secrets would be seen through by this gaze. However, Chu Fengmian didn't care. No matter how Lord Yu probed, he couldn't find any secrets on Chu Fengmian. Interesting. I can see that you're just the 9 Tribulations Emperor Gu, but a mere 9 Tribulations Emperor Gu can hide from my eyes. I didn't expect there to be someone like you in the Songhai Star Zone. Lord Yu looked at Chu Fengmian and couldn't find any secrets on him. He was a little surprised and couldn't help but sigh. I'll tell you my identity first. I'm Yu Wuhan from Lihan Heaven. Lord Yu looked at Chu Fengmian and told him his identity. Chu Fengmian had never heard of Yu Wuhan before, but the next sentence he said was from Lihan Heaven. Lihan Heaven was one of the 3 sacred realms. Johua Heaven, Lihan Heaven, and Realm Demon Heaven were the 3 sacred realms. They were the apex of millions of starfields and were called sacred realms. Yu Wuhan was from Lihan Heaven, one of the three sacred realms. It was no wonder that his strength was so heaven-defying. Only a sacred realm could give birth to such a monstrous talent. Since Yu Wuhan told him his identity, Chu Fengmian didn't have any intention of hiding it. This person must have known from the beginning that Chu Fengmian wasn't Hai Shirsi. I'm Chu Fengmian from the Azure Dragon Star Zone, Chu Fengmian said casually. At the same time, a jade talisman appeared in his hand. The words, Dragon Lord, were engraved on the jade talisman. It was the jade talisman that the Mad Dragon Emperor gave Chu Fengmian when he left the Azure Dragon sect. It represented the identity of the Dragon Lord. It was better not to expose that Chu Fengmian came from the 9 regions. This jade talisman could prove Chu Fengmian's identity. Azure Dragon Star area? Yu Wuhan frowned. He thought that a genius like Chu Fengmian would at least come from a sanctuary like him. But Chu Fengmian was actually from the Azure Dragon Star area? The Azure Dragon Star area was inferior to the vast Sea Star area. It was only a third-grade continent. However, when Yu Wuhan saw the jade talisman in Chu Fengmian's hand, he was deeply shocked. He looked at it carefully, as if to confirm its authenticity. Dragon Master Token? Are you the Dragon Lord of the Blue Dragon sect? Yu Wuhan's voice was filled with astonishment. Seems like the identity of the Dragon Lord is still useful. Chu Fengmian looked at Yu Wuhan, who was from the holy region of Lihan Heaven, and couldn't help but think to himself. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian had accepted the Dragon Master Medallion back then. Now, he could use it to conceal his identity. That old dragon of the Blue Dragon sect actually made you the Dragon Lord. It seems that you are indeed extraordinary. Yu Wuhan glanced at Chu Fengmian and sighed. He looked at Chu Fengmian with a lot more respect. Originally, Yu Wuhan looked at Chu Fengmian as if he was looking at a little guy. Martial artists and demon gods from the holy region all had this kind of arrogance. The few young people from Jianwang Heaven that Chu Fengmian had met were all like this. This was the feeling that Yu Wuhan gave Chu Fengmian just now. But now that he knew Chu Fengmian's identity as the Dragon Lord, the contempt in Yu Wuhan's eyes completely disappeared. This made Chu Fengmian secretly surprised. What was the use of the identity of the Dragon Lord? If it was the position of the sect master of a third-grade continent, Yu Wuhan wouldn't have valued it so much. It seemed that the identity of the Dragon Lord had other secrets, but at this time, Chu Fengmian was too lazy to think about it. He would ask the Mad Dragon Emperor when he saw him again. Since you are the Dragon Lord of the Blue Dragon sect, I will call you young friend. Yu Wuhan looked at Chu Fengmian and said, changing the topic. It seems that you are going to the Sea Sword sect to do something? That's right. Chu Fengmian nodded. Of course, he didn't disguise himself as Hai Shirsi for fun. Since Yu Wuhan saw through Chu Fengmian's disguise, he definitely knew that Chu Fengmian was going to the Sea Sword sect for some reason. Even I can't see through the disguise of Hai Shirsi. However, your disguise has an obvious flaw that you don't know about, Yu Wuhan said. Are you talking about the fortuitous encounter in Guhai? Chu Fengmian frowned. Chu Fengmian originally wanted to fabricate that Hai Shirsi's strength had increased by saying that he had obtained a fortuitous encounter in Guhai. This would also explain why Hai 14's strength had suddenly skyrocketed. However, when Yu Wuhan recognized that Chu Fengmian wasn't Hai Shirsi, the problem lay in the fortuitous encounter in Guhai. In fact, Hai Shirsi had never truly entered Guhai. His understanding of Guhai came from the conversations of others and the records of the Sea Sword sect. Originally, Chu Fengmian thought that this excuse was flawless. However, it now looked like Yu Wuhan could recognize that Chu Fengmian was not Hai Shirsi. This proved that Chu Fengmian's excuse had some loopholes. That's right. Those who have entered Guhai have an aura. You don't have that aura. Regular half-step celestial realm cultivators might not be able to sense it, but those who have some understanding of Guhai would be able to recognize it. Yu Wuhan said slowly as he looked at Chu Fengmian. Not many people in the Sea Sword sect have been to Guhai. However, there are a few old antiques who went to Gu Hai when they were young. If you run into them, you won't be able to hide it from them. An aura in Gu Hai. Chu Fengmian frowned. He did not know about this at all. If Chu Fengmian had known about this before, he could have come up with another excuse. However, the matter of Chu Fengmian obtaining an fortuitous encounter in Gu Hai had already spread throughout the Sea Sword sect. It would not be easy to change it. I have a way to help you cover it up. Yu Wuhan smiled when he saw Chu Fengmian's expression. When Chu Fengmian heard that, he suddenly raised his head and stared at Yu Wuhan. Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed some hostility. This Yu Wuhan would not help Chu Fengmian for no reason. Chu Fengmian did not believe that Yu Wuhan was here to be a good person. What do you want? Chu Fengmian asked coldly after staring at Yu Wuhan for a long time. End of this chapter. Chapter 1917. Divine Elephant Profound Strength Pellet. Yu Wuhan looked at Chu Fengmian and smiled. I know that the glittering jewel 3 demons once obtained an alchemy kingdom grand ceremony and refined a batch of divine elephant profound strength pellet. Now that the glittering jewel kingdom has been destroyed by you, this batch of divine elephant profound strength pellets should have fallen into your hands. I need 3 divine elephant profound energy pellet. Of course, I won't take advantage of you for nothing. I can give you the batch of holy herbs you need. At the same time, I can help you cover up Gu Hai's fortuitous encounter. Yu Wuhan didn't beat around the bush. His goal was the divine elephant profound strength pellet. However, Yu Wuhan originally didn't put Chu Fengmian in his eyes. He only wanted to make a deal with Chu Fengmian. But now that he knew Chu Fengmian's identity as the Dragon Lord of the Blue Dragon sect, he changed his mind. He might as well help Chu Fengmian once more. The Dragon Lord of the Blue Dragon sect wasn't just a sect master. He had an even deeper identity. Although Chu Fengmian didn't know this, he could feel that Yu Wuhan's change in attitude towards him was due to his identity as the Dragon Lord of the Blue Dragon sect. 3 divine elephant profound strength pellets for a batch of sacred herbs was definitely a good deal. Moreover, this deal also included Yu Wuhan's help to cover up Chu Fengmian's opportunity in Gu Hai. Here are the 3 divine elephant profound strength pellet. Chu Fengmian pondered for a moment and accepted Yu Wuhan's proposal. Chu Fengmian originally had the idea of taking out a few of these divine elephant profound energy pills to exchange for some of the things he needed. Now that he had this batch of sacred herbs, Chu Fengmian could start refining the minor flying immortal pellet. As long as he could refine a batch of minor flying immortal pellets, Chu Fengmian would have the ability to break through to the half-step celestial realm. Great. Yu Wuhan nodded and waved his hand, putting away the 3 divine elephant profound strength pellets. In the next moment, a stone emerged from his palm and flew towards Chu Fengmian. This stone didn't look any different from an ordinary stone, but there seemed to be a faint, unique power on it. This is a stone of Gu Hai. This stone can only be found in the depths of Gu Hai. If you carry this stone with you, your body will naturally be tainted by Gu Hai's aura, and everyone will think that you have been there. Yu Wuhan explained looking at Chu Fengmian. When Chu Fengmian heard this, he nodded his head and took the stone with him. Then, he used his spiritual sense to investigate Chu Fengmian's body. Indeed, there was a unique aura's aura. This aura was unique aura. This kind of aura was incomparably unique. Even Chu Fengmian was unable to determine what kind of power it was. There was Fengmian had no will. Of course. The Oblivion Sea King was already waiting outside the room. Seeing Chu Fengmian come out, the Oblivion Sea King hurriedly greeted him. He presented an empty ring with both hands and said respectfully, 14th young master, the holy herbs have been packed. They are all in this empty ring. The Oblivion Sea King's attitude was much more respectful than before. After feeling the threat of Chu Fengmian's sword intent, he realized how terrifying Chu Fengmian's strength was. He had never imagined that a Nine Tribulations Emperor Gu could be so tyrannical. Facing an expert, one must maintain respect. Chu Fengmian took the empty ring and poured his spiritual energy into it. He saw hundreds of holy herbs neatly placed inside. Among the hundreds of holy herbs, 3 of them were the most dazzling. These 3 holy herbs were ancient-grade holy herbs. They emitted an incomparably pure medicinal fragrance. Chu Fengmian felt that if he directly swallowed these 3 ancient holy herbs, he would gain great benefit. He had a feeling of longing. However, Chu Fengmian still resisted this feeling of longing. The effect of refining these ancient holy herbs into elixirs was 10 times or 100 times better than swallowing them directly. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Chu Fengmian would not waste them. In addition to these 3 ancient holy herbs, the other holy herbs were the 9 holy herbs needed to refine minor flying immortal elixirs. Chu Fengmian calculated that these holy herbs could refine 10 cauldrons of minor flying immortal elixirs. How many minor flying immortal elixirs could be refined in each cauldron would depend on the alchemist's skill. Chu Fengmian had never refined minor flying immortal elixirs before, so he did not dare to estimate. It was absolutely worth it to exchange 3 divine elephant dark strength elixirs for so many holy herbs. In addition to these holy herbs, there were also 40,000 divine-grade spirit stones. They were piled up into a small mountain. Chu Fengmian exchanged this batch of holy herbs with the divine elephant dark strength elixirs. The glittering Jewel Dynasty's treasury that he sold previously were also exchanged for divine-grade spirit stones. Even if Chu Fengmian used his divine veins to condense 40,000 divine-grade spirit stones, it would still take a lot of time. Chu Fengmian also took all of these divine-grade spirit stones. Let's go back to the Sea Sword sect and get the sword principal totem first. Chu Fengmian put away the empty ring and looked at the Oblivion Sea King. If you have any immortal stones, you can inform me. Chu Fengmian left these words, then turned into a ray of light and left the Lunar Ocean Merchant Guild. Chu Fengmian had already shown his strength in front of the Oblivion Sea King. Now, there was no need for Chu Fengmian to hide anything. The ray of light disappeared instantly. The layers of restrictions of the Lunar Ocean Merchant Guild could not stop Chu Fengmian at all. The Oblivion Sea King could not see Chu Fengmian's figure clearly. After Chu Fengmian left, his expression finally relaxed. Although Chu Fengmian's realm was not as high as his and was only the 9 Tribulations Emperor Gu, when he faced Chu Fengmian, he felt a great pressure and a deep fear. After Chu Fengmian left, the Oblivion Sea King could finally breathe a sigh of relief. This Hai Shirsi is even more terrifying than Hai Chang'e. It seems that Hai Chang'e will suffer a great loss if he wants to deal with this person. The Oblivion Sea King said, then his figure flickered and left to do other things. After leaving the Lunar Ocean Merchant Guild, Chu Fengmian's ray of light flew straight towards the city. He was ready to return to the Sea Sword sect. Chu Fengmian had already completed the life-ending task. Now that he returned to the Sea Sword sect, he could get 100,000 contribution points. Then, he could apply to comprehend the sword principal totem. First, he set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Book Guest House Mobile Version Website. Chapter 1918. Of course, comprehending the sword principal totem was just a cover. Chu Fengmian's real purpose was to get the sword principal totem. The mystery of the sword principal totem was not something that Chu Fengmian could comprehend in a short time. Even now, Chu Fengmian often tried to comprehend the 3 sword principal totems in his hands. Every time he tried to comprehend them, Chu Fengmian would be able to comprehend something new and his understanding of sword principle would be further deepened. To fully comprehend a sword principal totem, it would take at least hundreds of attempts. Moreover, as Chu Fengmian's strength became stronger, he would be able to comprehend the deeper content. Chu Fengmian did not have the time to stay in the Sea Sword sect and earn contribution points to comprehend the Sword Principle Totem. This time, Chu Fengmian would be able to get close to the Sword Dao Totem and find an opportunity to snatch the Sword Dao Totem away and escape. If I get the Sword Principle Totem, my swordsmanship can be further improved. When the time comes, I will find an opportunity to collect immortal stones and refine the small flying immortal elixir. When I step into the half-step celestial being realm, my strength will be enough to fight against a celestial being. Chu Fengmian could not help thinking. Celestial being realm, immortal ascension. In Chu Fengmian's opinion, this was simply a fairy tale. But now, Chu Fengmian was not far away from this step. While thinking, Chu Fengmian had already passed through the gate of South Sea City and returned to the Sea Sword sect. After Chu Fengmian defeated Hai Shisan with a single move outside the Sea Sword sect, he had already established an illustrious reputation. Even some of the core disciples were now respectful towards Chu Fengmian, not daring to offend him. Chu Fengmian returned to the Sea Sword sect and went straight to the mission hall. Didn't I hear that Hai Shisan took on a suicide mission? Why did he come back in such a short time? It seems that he failed. I heard that the suicide mission was to annihilate the Glittering Jewel Dynasty. What? Annihilate the Glittering Jewel Dynasty? How is that possible? Even if only Linlang Jie of the Glittering Jewel 3 Demons is still alive, he's still more powerful than an ordinary elite of the half-step celestial realm. On top of that, there are 14 demon venerables at the peak of the 9 tribulations Emperor Gu. Even the elders of our Sea Sword sect may not have this ability. That's right. The Glittering Jewel Demons have been running the Glittering Jewel Dynasty for thousands of years. The Glittering Jewel Demons have done many evil deeds, but no one dares to go to the chaotic ocean to destroy the Glittering Jewel Dynasty. This Hai Shisan actually dares to accept this suicide mission. He is asking for trouble. Hai Shisan is going to suffer a big setback this time. If he fails the mission, he will be punished by the sect. It's said that Hai Shisan obtained a fortuitous encounter from Gu Hai, causing his strength to soar. In the end, he didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and decided to accept this suicide mission. It's good to let him suffer a loss so that he won't be so arrogant. Many disciples of the Sea Sword sect sneered when they saw Chu Fengmian heading for the mission hall. Hai 14 is back. Let's go. We let him escape last time. Let's go quickly this time. On a mountain peak of the Sea Sword sect, a few people were sitting on stone benches and chatting. Suddenly, someone saw Chu Fengmian's return. These people stopped talking and flew towards the mission hall. Hai Chang'e had given them the mission to rope in Hai Shisan. Last time, Chu Fengmian left quickly, so they didn't stop him. This time, they immediately went to the mission hall when Chu Fengmian returned. Chu Fengmian arrived at the mission hall and was about to submit the mission when he was suddenly stopped by someone. Hai Shisan, wait. We have something to talk to you about. Chu Fengmian turned his head and saw 3 figures standing behind him. These 3 people were looking at Chu Fengmian with a sneer on their faces. These 3 figures were all young men. Each of them emitted a sharp sword intent. Their strength wasn't below Hai Shisan, who Chu Fengmian had defeated before. Chu Fengmian's mind moved. He checked Hai Shisan's memories and knew the identities of these 3 people. These 3 people were the core disciples of the Sea Sword sect, Hai Shi, Hai Shichi, and Hai 19. These 3 people were the core disciples of the Sea Sword sect who had obtained the surname Hai. In theory, they were also people who could compete for the position of the sect master of the Sea Sword sect. However, not every core disciple of the Sea Sword sect had the intention to compete for the position of the sect master. Some of them directly sought refuge with others. For example, Hai Shisan was arrogant and didn't want to be under others. He had always been alone. Hai Shi, Hai 17, and Hai 19 all sought refuge with the 3rd young master, Hai Chang'e. This matter wasn't a secret in the Sea Sword sect. Hai Changa was known as the #1 core disciple of the Sea Sword sect because of the three of them. After all, which core disciple of the Sea Sword sect wasn't a peerless genius? Hai Changa could subdue them and make them work for him. Hai Changa's strength was self-evident. Hai Shi, Hai 17, and Hai 19, the three of them actually came to the mission hall together? It seems like they came for Hai Shirsi. Could it be that the third young master wants to make a move on Hai Shirsi? It's not impossible. Hai Shirsi's strength has greatly increased, and he has the opportunity to threaten the third young master. Naturally, he won't be as calm as before. This is a fierce battle. Let's retreat far away and not get involved. Many disciples of the mission hall retreated and distanced themselves from Chu Fengmian's group. What's the matter? Chu Fengmian looked at the three of them and said coldly. Hai Shirsi followed the three of them and didn't have any relationship with them. Naturally, Chu Fengmian showed an incomparably cold attitude. Of course we have a reason to look for you. Let me tell you, this time we came on behalf of the third young master to give you an opportunity. The leader, Hai Shi, looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly. You want to give me an opportunity? What opportunity? Chu Fengmian frowned and said. He didn't want to cause trouble, but trouble came knocking on his door. We want you to serve the third young master. This is your honor. There are so many people in the Sea Sword sect who want to serve the third young master, but they don't have the qualifications. Hai Shi said with a superior tone. Serve Hai Changa? I'm not interested in that. You guys are willing to be dogs, but I'm not interested. Chu Fengmian snorted coldly. He could see that the three of them didn't come with good intentions. Now, they want Chu Fengmian to serve Hai Changa? Not to mention that Chu Fengmian wasn't the real Hai Shirsi. Even if he was, he wouldn't submit to others with his personality. Presumptuous. Hai Shirsi, this is an opportunity given to you by the third young master. It's a reward for you. Why don't you know how to cherish it? First, set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Remember, book guest house. Chapter 1919. Do you think you can contend with the third young master just because you had a few fortuitous encounters? What a joke. A cold voice rang out. Hai 17 also spoke. He stared at Chu Fengmian with an unfriendly gaze. Just now, Chu Fengmian's words had directly turned them into dogs that worked for Hai Changa, causing their eyes to be filled with killing intent. I heard that you accepted the suicide mission? You're going to give up now, right? You can't bear the punishment of giving up on the suicide mission. Now, you just have to obediently serve the third young master. Using the third young master's status, he can talk to the elders. The last person, Hai 19, spoke. Of course, if you don't know how to appreciate kindness and want to be the third young master's enemy, then you won't be able to accept the punishment of the suicide mission. There won't be a place for you in the future Seasword sect. Hai 19 spoke. The threat in his words was clear and undisguised. Is that so? Hai Changa hasn't even become the sect master of the Seasword sect yet. How can he be so arrogant? So that I won't have a place to stand? He doesn't have the ability to do that. Chu Fengmian laughed and said disdainfully. Scram. I'm in a good mood today, so I won't teach you a lesson. Go back and tell Hai Changa that he wants me to work for him. Tell him to come here personally and kneel until I'm satisfied. I'll consider it. Impudent. Hai 14, you don't know how to appreciate kindness. How dare you insult the third young master? Let's teach him a lesson first. Otherwise, he won't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Hai 11, Hai 17, and Hai 19 shouted in unison after hearing Chu Fengmian's words. As for Hai 11, he immediately drew his spiritual sword and slashed at Chu Fengmian with a beam of sword energy. According to the rules of the Seasword sect, disciples weren't allowed to fight in the sect. However, Hai 11, Hai 17, and the others were all core disciples. They were unscrupulous and didn't put the sect rules in their eyes. They suddenly attacked in the mission hall. The elders in the mission hall didn't stop them when they saw this scene. They weren't afraid of High 11, High 17, and the others, but they were wary of High Chang'e behind them. In the eyes of countless Sea Sword sect elders, High Chang'e was firmly seated in the position of the future Sea Sword sect master. Offending High Chang'e over such a small matter was definitely not worth it. Naturally, no one was willing to stop him. Is no one going to stop it? It seems that in this Sea Sword sect, strength is more important than anything. Chu Fengmian also noticed this scene and thought to himself. Originally, he didn't want to make a move, but since no one stopped him, Chu Fengmian didn't hold back. The so-called sect rules could be trampled on as long as one had enough strength. Whoosh! High 11's sword chi was aimed at Chu Fengmian's chest in an instant. This sword strike didn't contain a killing move, but if Chu Fengmian didn't handle it in time, he would be seriously injured and suffer a great loss. Clearly, he planned to teach Chu Fengmian a lesson. However, right at that moment, Chu Fengmian suddenly moved. Facing the incoming sword energy, Chu Fengmian merely extended a finger and pointed forward. There was a loud bang. When Chu Fengmian's finger touched the sword chi that High 11 had unleashed, the sword chi shattered with a loud bang. With a single finger, Chu Fengmian broke High 11's sword chi. You dare to teach me a lesson with this little strength of yours? Chu Fengmian's voice rang out. Chu Fengmian suddenly made a move. The strength that he displayed was extremely tyrannical, and it was beyond High 11's imagination. Before High Shi could react, Chu Fengmian's finger had already turned into a beam of sword chi and slashed towards him. Boom! The sword chi slashed at High 11's chest. High 11's clothes were torn to shreds, and his body was sent flying. He crashed into a pillar in the mission hall and spat out a mouthful of blood. You! Attack! High 17 and High 19 were stunned. They didn't expect this to happen. However, the moment High 11 was sent flying, the two of them reacted at the same time. They pulled out their spiritual swords, and with one on the left and the other on the right, they displayed their sword techniques and slashed towards Chu Fengmian. Break! Chu Fengmian's expression didn't change. He casually condensed a spiritual energy into a spiritual sword in his hand and slashed it out. Boom! The power of the sword immediately turned into 1,000 feet long sword light that swept everything. High 17 and High 19 were drawn into the sword light, and countless sword lights pierced through their bodies. They immediately fell to the ground. High 17 and High 19 were seriously injured. Their injuries were even more serious than High 11's. They wouldn't be able to recover without a few months. Killing a core disciple in the Seasword sect was a big deal, and it would attract the attention of the higher-ups of the Seasword sect. Therefore, Chu Fengmian showed mercy with this sword. He didn't kill them, but only seriously injured them. Shoo! The whole place was silent. Countless eyes gathered on High 11, High 17, and High 19. Many of the Seasword sect's disciples who witnessed this scene were shocked. Many of them blinked their eyes, as if they were trying to confirm the scene in front of them. These three core disciples who were given the surname High were defeated by Chu Fengmian like chickens and dogs. They were all lying on the ground. How is this possible? What kind of opportunity did High 14, no, the 14th young master get? Even High 11 couldn't withstand a single blow from him? The three of them together couldn't defeat the 14th young master? This is too terrifying. It seems that the 14th young master can really compete with the third young master. No wonder he didn't put the third young master in his eyes. Look, he's going to submit the mission. Could it be that the 14th young master really completed the suicide mission? Did he destroy the glittering jewel dynasty? Suddenly, someone saw that after Chu Fengmian defeated High 11 and the other two, he didn't even bother to look at them. He directly walked towards an elder in the mission hall. Originally, they didn't believe that Chu Fengmian had the ability to complete the suicide mission and destroy the glittering jewel dynasty. After all, this was something that even the elders of the Seasword sect might not be able to do. But now, Chu Fengmian's strength was boundless and could be called invincible. They were a little doubtful that Chu Fengmian accepted the suicide mission because he was arrogant, but because he was confident. 14th Young Master, what's the matter? The elder in the mission hall saw Chu Fengmian coming over with a fawning expression. His tone was also very respectful. I'm here to submit the mission. Chu Fengmian's face was very calm, as if he had just completed a small task. He didn't show any complacency. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second to remember. Book Guest House Mobile Version. Chapter 1920. While Chu Fengmian was meditating, he took out a jade talisman and handed it to the elder of the mission palace. The jade talisman emitted a dangerous red light, which was the symbol of a suicide mission. It's really a suicide mission. Did Hai Shirsi really complete the suicide mission? They were just guessing, but they couldn't believe it when they saw Chu Fengmian take out the jade talisman. When the mission hall elder heard Chu Fengmian's words, he was also in disbelief. He was a little dazed and only recovered after a while. You've completed the mission? The elder of the mission palace took the jade talisman, his voice trembling. He didn't even have the ability to accept the suicide mission, but Chu Fengmian actually completed it? One should know that the suicide mission this time was much more difficult than most of the suicide missions, which was why no one dared to accept it. Do you have any evidence? The mission hall elder said to Chu Fengmian after recovering from his shock. Evidence? Chu Fengmian thought for a while and suddenly stretched out his hand. This should be enough, right? Countless people curiously looked over and looked at Chu Fengmian's palm. There was a lump of demonic blood lying quietly in his palm. This ball of demon blood was the condensation of the essence blood of all the disciples of the Linlang dynasty. This demon blood, this is the essence blood of the disciples of the Linlang dynasty. How many disciples of the Linlang dynasty have you killed? Another mission hall elder walked over. When he saw the clump of demon blood, he exclaimed in shock. The ball of demon blood in Chu Fengmian's palm represented the lives of many disciples of the Linlang dynasty. Leave no one alive. Chu Fengmian said calmly. Leave no one alive? The few mission hall elders all looked at each other. For a moment, they were all stunned and did not know what to say. The elder of the mission palace, who took the jade talisman, took the ball of demon blood and carefully checked it with his spiritual consciousness. The demon blood of a half-step celestial being, but it's the demon blood of Linlang Jie. Linlang Jie is really dead. There's also the demon blood of 14 demon sovereigns. These 14 demon sovereigns are all dead, and a total of 128 hall masters are all dead. The more the elder of the mission palace confirmed, the more shocked he was. This suicide mission, as long as one killed Linlang Jie and destroyed the Linlang dynasty, it would be considered completed. But he didn't expect Chu Fengmian to complete it so thoroughly. The entire Linlang dynasty was wiped out by Chu Fengmian, leaving no survivors. Mission completion rate 100%. The elder of the mission palace said was shocked. 100%. Logically speaking, one could get a reward as long as one completed a mission. After all, the missions issued by the mission hall were all extremely difficult. It was already difficult to complete more than half of them. The 100% completion rate of the Linlang dynasty. The Linlang dynasty's dynasty was dynasty. In the future, it would be impossible for the Linlang dynasty to make a comeback. Hai's master is Linlin? Said Master Xiao. Is. There were 5 half-step celestial realm experts who went deep into the chaotic ocean to attack the Linlang dynasty's lair, but they all failed. The Linlang dynasty has been around for thousands of years, but it's destroyed just like that. How many contribution points will he get? Everyone looked at Chu Fengmian with envy. The difficulty of the suicide mission was extremely high, but once completed, the reward would be shocking. Especially this time, Chu Fengmian's mission completion rate was 100%. The reward was unimaginable. The mission is completed, you should give me the reward. Chu Fengmian looked at the elder of the mission palace and said, Please wait for a moment, Master Xiao. I need to inform the higher-ups of this mission before I can give out the reward. The elder of the mission palace said nervously when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. The reward for completing a suicide mission was not something that an elder like him could decide. It needed to be discussed by countless elders. The elders of the mission palace looked empty. Chu Fengmian could see that they were discussing something. After a while, the elder of the mission palace who took the jade talisman woke up. The elder of the mission palace picked up a jade talisman, and with a stroke of his palm, it flew towards Chu Fengmian. There was an extra 100,000 contribution points in the jade talisman on Chu Fengmian's chest. The reward of 100,000 contribution points was in his hands. Just as Chu Fengmian was about to leave, the elder of the mission palace hurriedly called out to him. Master Xiao, there's another reward besides 100,000 contribution points. This is a divine pulse elixir. The elder of the mission palace stopped Chu Fengmian and handed him a jade bottle. Divine pulse elixir? Chu Fengmian was delighted. This was an ancient sacred elixir that was invaluable. It could improve one's spiritual pulse, and it was very useful for half-step celestial realm experts. Spiritual pulse represented one's aptitude. There were very few elixirs that could improve one's spiritual pulse, and the divine pulse elixir was one of them. Although it wasn't as valuable as an ancient sacred elixir like the nirvana elixir, the value of the divine pulse elixir was no less than the divine elephant profound strength elixir. Although Chu Fengmian had no use for the divine pulse elixir, he could give it to the people around him, or exchange it for a large amount of sacred elixirs. For example, Yu Wuhan wasn't a divine pulse elixir. Chu Fengmian could sell the divine pulse elixir for a good price. It seemed that after Chu Fengmian showed his strength this time, the Seasword sect also wanted to rope him in. They actually took out such a precious ancient sacred elixir. This was the benefit of having tyrannical strength. Once the strength was strong enough, the Seasword sect would spend a lot of resources to cultivate him. This was also a kind of roping in. However, the higher-ups of the Seasword sect would never dream that the current High Shirsi was Chu Fengmian in disguise. It would be a waste to reject the benefits that came knocking on their door. Chu Fengmian immediately took the Divine Pulse Elixir and left. Divine Pulse Elixir, it seems that the sect wants to rope in the 14th Master. That's right. It's said that the 3rd Master was once bestowed with the Divine Pulse Elixir, and his strength skyrocketed. If that's the case, the 14th Master might also compete for the sect master's position. We also have to work hard and strive to be bestowed with the Divine Pulse Elixir by the sect in the future. Chu Fengmian left the mission hall. High Shi, High 17, and High 19 had already left. Chu Fengmian didn't bother with them. The moment Chu Fengmian stepped out of the mission hall, a huge scroll suddenly appeared in the sky above the mission hall, enveloping the entire hall. First set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, Book Guest House Mobile Version Website. Chapter 1921. The moment Chu Fengmian stepped out of the mission hall, he was also shrouded by the painting. Rumble. The moment this picture scroll descended, it was as if it wanted to envelop everyone and suppress them forever within the picture scroll. The long song of landscape painting. Chu Fengmian raised his head to look at the painting and said coldly. The painting was Hai Changa's signature spiritual weapon, the long song of landscape painting. Chu Fengmian was shrouded in the painting, and he immediately felt a boundless pressure descending upon him. The mighty power descended and suppressed Chu Fengmian's body. The power seemed to want to suppress Chu Fengmian in the painting forever. After Chu Fengmian defeated Hai Shi, Hai 17, and Hai 19, Hai Changa couldn't help but make a move. Chu Fengmian's actions were simply provoking his prestige in the Seasword sect. If Hai Changa could still hold back, he wouldn't be worthy of being called the number 1 core disciple of the Seasword sect. The long song of landscape painting. It's the third young master. Let's retreat. Many of the nearby Sea Sword sect disciples all retreated one after another, hiding in the mission hall. Several elders in the mission hall joined hands to lay down layers of restrictions, shrouding the mission hall to prevent it from being affected by the long song of landscape painting. Chu Fengmian was the only one who was bearing the suppressive force of the Longsong River and landscape portrait. Everyone knew that Hai Changa was tyrannical, but there weren't many people who had seen Hai Changa in action. Now, Hai Changa's power was monstrous. The long song of landscape painting was simply a half-step celestial being. Even the elders of the Seasword sect had to avoid it. This is the third young master's true strength. He's too strong. No wonder he's the #1 core disciple of the Seasword sect. Many disciples of the Seasword sect looked up at the sky and exclaimed. Under such power, Hai Changa was simply an undefeatable god of war. These disciples of the Seasword sect couldn't imagine who could defeat Hai Changa. His invincible posture was displayed. A figure stood above the long song of landscape painting like a high and mighty deity, looking at Chu Fengmian with a pair of eyes. Hai Shirsi, I'll give you a chance. Surrender or die, Hai Changa said coldly. His tone was high and mighty, as if it was a judgment, an order that couldn't be refused. Under these words, once he refused, only death would await him. Life and death seemed to be under Hai Changa's words. Surrender or die. Hai Changa, I didn't go looking for trouble with you, but you came knocking on my door. Today, I'll let you know that your so-called invincibility is nothing in front of me. Chu said to Hai Changa to the song of landscape painting. He Hai Changa to the song of landscape painting. He to the song to the painting. This was a suppressive force that even a half-step heaven-tier elite would have to retreat, yet Chu Fengmian broke it with a wave of his hand. He waved his hand, and a wave of spiritual power swept out. The painting shook a few times. Hai Shirsi is also very strong. Is this Hai Shirsi's real strength? Many eyes were fixed on Chu Fengmian. Many elders of the mission hall were shocked when they saw Chu Fengmian break the suppression of the long song of rivers and mountains painting with a wave of his hand. It's a fierce battle. I didn't expect our Seasword sect to have two such figures. I wonder who has the upper hand. Let's see. Hai Changa's strength is more than this. Many spiritual senses shrouded over. Even many elders of the Seasword sect who were in seclusion came out to watch the battle. In the sky, looking at the long song of rivers and mountains painting shaking a few times under his feet, he couldn't help but reveal a somewhat dignified expression. You have some skills. Hai Changa looked at Chu Fengmian and said with a cold smile. It seems that I've underestimated you. But even if you have some fortuitous encounters, you're still vulnerable in front of me. Since you don't want to surrender, I'll suppress you in the song of landscape painting to increase my strength. Hai Changa roared again and again. Suddenly, all of his spiritual energy burst out and poured into the song of landscape painting. The song of landscape painting underwent various changes. Hai Changa's spiritual energy resonated with the various forces in it. Suddenly, countless figures appeared in the song of landscape painting. Each of them contained an extremely strong power. The aura of true Emperor, Emperor Gu, and even half-step celestial realm erupted from these figures. At this moment, all of the figures condensed all of their power into the song of landscape painting and turned into a huge force to suppress Chu Fengmian. Are these the people who have been suppressed in the song of landscape painting for eternity? There are 5 half-step celestial realm experts. That's glittering destruction and glittering extinction. The 2 of them are also suppressed in the song of landscape painting. This Hai Shirsi is also very strong, forcing Hai Changa to use his trump card. Hai Changa hasn't used the full power of the song of landscape painting for a long time. Some elders stared at the figures in the song of landscape painting and exclaimed. The song of landscape painting was a peerless half-immortal treasure. It was said that it was a spirit treasure of a celestial realm expert and fell into the hands of Hai Changa. The long song of river and mountain painting was capable of suppressing others and suppressing them within the painting for all eternity. Once suppressed in the song of landscape painting, even one's strength would be used by the owner of the painting. Although Hai Changa was only in the realm of 9 tribulations Emperor Gu, there were 5 half-step celestial realm experts and dozens of Emperor Gu and true emperors suppressed in the song of landscape painting. The power of these half-step celestial realm experts, Emperor Gu, and true emperors erupted at the same time. It was as if the power of an army was condensed in Hai Changa's body. The power of this attack was equivalent to the power of a small sect exploding at the same time towards Chu Fengmian. Soon, you will also come to the song of landscape painting and be used by me. Hai Changa stared coldly at Chu Fengmian. His expression showed that victory was already in his grasp, and he was incomparably arrogant. Is that so? You think you're invincible after suppressing a few half-step celestial realm experts? It's just a lousy painting break for me. Chu Fengmian laughed loudly. End of chapter. Chapter 1922. Chu Fengmian looked up at the sky. All the figures in the painting of rivers and mountains were bursting with power. His figures suddenly moved. Chu Fengmian took a step forward and turned into a beam of light, shooting straight up into the sky. A spiritual sword condensed in his hand. Shocking sword will burst out from Chu Fengmian's back. The swordsmanship of the Sea Sword sect was activated to the extreme by Chu Fengmian. With a shocking sword strike, tens of thousands of sword radiance shot out toward the sky. Behind Chu Fengmian, an ancient shadow emerged. The moment Chu Fengmian unsheathed his spiritual sword, his sword will became divine. The shadow of the founding ancestor of the Sea Sword sect, the Sea Sword Emperor, appeared and merged with Chu Fengmian's shadow, increasing Chu Fengmian's power. Boom! A sword ray flashed. None of the figures in the painting could withstand the sharpness of the sword light. Suddenly, several figures fell one after another under the sword light. These figures were all experts that Hai Changa had spent a great deal of effort to suppress. They were suppressed within the long song of rivers and mountains painting, and their strength was his to use. Now, Chu Fengmian was about to break the painting. His sword light slashed into the long song of rivers and mountains painting. There was almost no power that could resist the sharpness of this sword light. The true emperors and ancient emperors trapped in the diagram fell one after another to Chu Fengmian's sword. Rumble! The entire painting of rivers and mountains was shaking violently under this sword light. It was on the verge of collapse and could break at any time. Among the suppressed experts, only the 5 figures of the half-step celestial being realm could barely resist. The remaining dozens of true emperors and Emperor Gu were all slain by Chu Fengmian's sword. How terrifying! This sword strike is going to shatter Hai Changa's song of rivers and mountains painting? How can Hai 14th's sword technique be so terrifying? Even the schoolmaster might not be able to beat him. What kind of fortune did he get? One sword to break all techniques. This Hai Shursi's swordsmanship is truly unstoppable. The long song of rivers and mountains painting was Hai Shursi's main source of strength. The reason why he could be considered invincible in the same realm as him, and could even fight opponents of a higher realm, was because of this painting. He had changed his name to the Long Song of Rivers and Mountains because he had obtained the Long Song of Rivers and Mountains painting. This was enough to prove how important the Long Song of Rivers and Mountains painting was to him. But now, Chu Fengmian's sword killed all the true emperors and Emperor Gu inside the painting. Although the 5 strongest half-step celestial realm cultivators had survived, the true emperors and ancient emperors had been slain. The painting's power had been reduced by at least 30%. It wasn't easy for Hai Changa to capture so many emperors. His efforts over the past several decades have gone down the drain because of Chu Fengmian's sword. Little animal! A furious roar resounded. Hai Changa was enraged to the extreme when he saw the messy long song of rivers and mountains painting. He had never suffered such a loss before. Chu Fengmian's sword destroyed his decades of effort. Killing Chu Fengmian wouldn't make up for this loss. I wanted to spare your life, but now that you've angered me, only death awaits you. I will suppress you for all eternity and torture you for all eternity. Hai Changa's voice was cold to the extreme. His shocking killing intent caused many of the elders who were watching this battle to tremble. Hai Changa is really angry now. He's going to do it himself. Hai Changa's true body is even more terrifying than this long song of landscape painting. While the crowd was still discussing, Hai Changa had already pulled out his spiritual sword. He took a step forward and aimed straight at Chu Fengmian. Thousands of sword light slashed toward him. Chu Fengmian put away the painting and placed it behind Hai Changa's back, continuously increasing his power. There were 5 half-step celestial realm experts in the painting of landscape. Now that the power of these 5 half-step celestial realm experts had been injected into Hai Changa's body, his power was even stronger than a real half-step celestial realm expert. The moment he attacked, the ever-changing sword lights slashed towards Chu Fengmian from all directions. Although Hai Changa was famous for his long song of river and mountain painting, his most terrifying aspect was his swordsmanship. As a core disciple of the Ocean's Word School, his sword technique was his most terrifying trump card. The ever-changing sword lights faintly showed a half-real appearance, hovering between illusion and reality. Even a sword grandmaster might not be able to tell the difference with a single glance. The illusory sword split into millions of parts. Chu Fengmian could tell at a glance that Hai Changa's sword intent had already reached the sword god realm. Hai Changa's sword technique had reached the great accomplishment level of the Ocean's Word School's sword technique. The so-called illusion is just a smoke screen. Break them all. Chu Fengmian sneered. He glanced around and saw all the illusory sword edges. He could tell at a glance whether they were real or fake. Boom. Chu Fengmian raised his right hand and the sword edge slashed down. Every real sword light was mercilessly shattered. All the real sword lights in the illusory sword edge were shattered by Chu Fengmian's sword without exception. Chu Fengmian's sword strike did not use much power. It was purely based on his comprehension of sword principles. However, it was accurate and destroyed all the sword lights of Hai Changa. How is this possible? Many elders of the Ocean's Word School were stunned when they saw this scene. They could not react for a long time. Even they could not tell whether Hai Changa's illusory sword strike was real or fake in an instant. They could only resist it. However, Chu Fengmian broke the illusory sword strike with a simple sword strike. Chu Fengmian saw through hundreds of real sword lights in thousands of sword lights at a glance. This made them somewhat unable to believe what they were seeing. Not only them, but even Hai Changa was shocked when he saw Chu Fengmian break his illusory sword strike so easily. He took a few steps back. My swordsmanship, this illusory sword, even the sect leader shouldn't be able to break through it. Even he did not expect that Chu Fengmian could break his illusory sword strike so quickly. I took your sword strike. Now it's your turn to take mine. Chu Fengmian did not bother to explain anything. What could a sword god realm sword principle do? In front of Chu Fengmian, the illusory sword strike could not hide at all. Whoosh! Chu Fengmian suddenly took a step forward and slashed at Hai Changa with his sword. Hai Changa saw Chu Fengmian's attack and stepped back repeatedly, trying to avoid the sharpness of Chu Fengmian's sword. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second to remember. Book Guest House Mobile Version. Chapter 1923. After this confrontation, Hai Changa finally understood that he had still underestimated Chu Fengmian. The long song of rivers and mountains painting was broken first. Now, even the thing he was most proud of was not Chu Fengmian's opponent. This made Hai Changa panic. Chu Fengmian's sword seemed to be a simple sword move, but the power it contained was the strongest sword move of the Sea Sword sect, the Sword of Sea God. It was the strongest sword move formed by the Sea God's power and the sword principle. The ancestor of the Sea Sword sect, the Sea Sword Emperor, was born in the Sea Clan. However, he didn't practice the Sea Clan's martial arts. He cultivated the sword principle and created this unique sword technique. The Sword of Sea God was the sword technique of the Sea Sword sect. It was also the most powerful sword move. Hai Changa didn't dare to face the sword directly. He retreated, and at the same time, used the long song of rivers and mountains painting to block in front of him. You want to block my sword with a broken painting? Chu Fengmian watched as Hai Changa took out the painting and placed it in front of him, intending to block Chu Fengmian's Sea God's sword. Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a disdainful smile. Even if it was the complete long song of rivers and mountains painting, Chu Fengmian didn't put it in his eyes. Not to mention, the long song of rivers and mountains painting had already been cracked by Chu Fengmian. A broken painting wanted to block Chu Fengmian's sword? It was like a daydream. Break! Chu Fengmian shouted coldly. As soon as the word break came out, the sword in Chu Fengmian's hand fiercely slashed down, slashing into the long song of rivers and mountains painting. Roar! Roar! The moment Chu Fengmian slashed out the sword in his hand, it was as if the angry roar of the Sea God came from between heaven and earth. It was as if the real Sea God had descended with endless anger, bursting out this boundless sword move. There was a loud rumble, along with an earth-shattering sound. The long song of rivers and mountains painting exploded. The long song of rivers and mountains painting was blown into pieces in the explosion. As a half-immortal tool, the long song of rivers and mountains painting was once an immortal spiritual tool. It was shattered. The power of this sword simply made people stare with their mouths agape. Many of the elders began to tremble when they saw the sword. Their hearts were filled with fear. The long song of rivers and mountains painting mountains painting mountains painting mountains. But they still couldn't resist Chu Fengmian's sword and were killed by Chu Fengmian's sword. If they had been the ones to block the Sea God's sword, they would have been killed on the spot, just like the long song of rivers and mountains painting. There was no other possibility. The long song of rivers and mountains Fengmian it was the Fengmian realm painting. Suppressed he. Who knew how much he? It was the long time. He was his. Without the power of the long song of rivers and mountains painting, Hai Changa was like an ant in front of Chu Fengmian's sword light. He shivered and no longer had the ability to resist Chu Fengmian. After breaking the long song of rivers and mountains painting, the Sea God's sword went straight for Hai Changa. But just as the Sea God's sword approached Hai Changa, an old voice came from the sky. Stop it! The voice contained endless majesty. Hai Changa's face finally showed some relief when he heard the voice. Chu Fengmian also slowly put away his sword and stopped attacking. It was the voice of the master of the Sea Sword sect. Chu Fengmian was still using the identity of Hai 14. Although defeating Hai Changa had established a supreme prestige, if he were to kill Hai Changa in front of everyone, it would be troublesome. After all, the rules of the Sea Sword sect were there. It was possible to fight, but it would be troublesome if someone died. Chu Fengmian didn't want to look for trouble. I'll let you go this time, but you can't escape punishment. Give me the empty ring as compensation for offending me. Chu Fengmian glanced at Hai Changa and suddenly clawed. Hai Changa's empty ring fell into Chu Fengmian's hand. Chu Fengmian couldn't kill Hai Changa, but he could still ask for some compensation. Hai Changa had always been the #1 core disciple of the Sea Sword sect. His status was extraordinary, so he must have obtained a lot of good things. Of course, Chu Fengmian wouldn't let go of his empty ring. When they saw Chu Fengmian snatch Hai Changa's empty ring, the elders at the side seemed somewhat displeased. However, when Chu Fengmian's gaze swept over them, the elders who had wanted to stop him all shut their mouths. not daring to say anything. Although these elders were all half-step celestial realm experts, if they really fought with Chu Fengmian, they wouldn't be able to withstand the sea god's sword. Chu Fengmian took Hai Changa's empty ring and didn't bother to pay attention to the battered and exhausted Hai Changa. I didn't expect Hai Changa to lose so miserably this time. What kind of heaven-shaking fortuitous encounter did Hai Shirsi get? His strength actually soared so quickly. Is Gu Hai's fortuitous encounter really so heaven-defying? Looks like we have to make a trip to Gu Hai if there's a chance. Many core disciples looked at Chu Fengmian's departing figure and started chatting. They believed that Hai Shirsi's sudden increase in strength was due to Gu Hai's fortuitous encounter, so they wanted to go to Gu Hai to try their luck. However, most of the elders were much calmer. The stronger they were, the clearer they knew how dangerous Gu Hai was. Even if they knew there was a heaven-shaking fortuitous encounter in Gu Hai, they didn't dare to step in. In this battle, Hai 14 has established his unparalleled prestige. No one among the disciples can be his opponent anymore. An elder muttered to himself, "The next sect master's position will definitely be Hai Shirsi's." But that might not be the case. If Hai Shirsi can get a heaven-shaking fortuitous encounter, others can too. Let's wait and see. Just don't provoke Hai Shirsi in the future. Some of the elders chatted for a while before leaving one after another. All the discussions were about Hai Shirsi. As for the loser, Hai Changa, no one paid any attention to him. Even some of Hai Changa's former disciples left one after another, thinking of ways to curry favor with Chu Fengmian. Strength was everything. Strength was everything. Chu Fengmian left the mission hall and walked around the Oceansward sect. Hearing the discussions around him, he smiled helplessly in his heart. He didn't sneak into the Oceansward sect for the sect master's position, but for the sword Dao totem. End of chapter. Chapter 1924. Who would have thought that he would become the #1 disciple of the Sea Sword sect? After defeating Hai Changa, Chu Fengmian's position as the #1 disciple of the Sea Sword sect was incomparably stable. No one could challenge him. However, this was also somewhat beneficial to Chu Fengmian. The sword Dao totem was the most precious treasure of the Sea Sword sect. If one wanted to comprehend the sword Dao totem, even a core disciple would have to spend contribution points and apply for an opportunity. The stronger one was, the greater the chance of successfully applying to comprehend the sword Dao totem. Now that Chu Fengmian had defeated Hai Changa, he had become the #1 disciple of the Sea Sword sect. If he applied to comprehend the sword Dao totem, he would definitely succeed. As Chu Fengmian walked, he checked Hai Changa's empty ring. Chu Fengmian had already guessed that there would be many treasures in Hai Changa's empty ring, which was why he had snatched it. Although he had been mentally prepared, the moment he opened the empty ring, Chu Fengmian was still shocked. Hai Changa's empty ring was filled with a dazzling array of wondrous items. It almost felt like the treasury of the Linlang dynasty. Chu Fengmian had discovered 3 types of ancient sacred elixirs. Even with Hai Changa's strength, he shouldn't have been able to obtain ancient sacred elixirs. They had probably been bestowed by the Sea Sword sect. These 3 ancient sacred elixirs were useless to Chu Fengmian, but if he took them out, he could still exchange them for many good things. For example, many precious treasures like the ancient sacred elixirs couldn't be bought with spirit stones. Even if Chu Fengmian was willing to pay divine-grade spirit stones, the other party might not be willing to sell. At that time, if he wanted to trade, he would have to rely on an exchange. This ancient sacred elixir was like the mysterious divine pulse elixir. Although Chu Fengmian had a divine pulse, it was already useless to him. However, Chu Fengmian was the only martialist with a divine pulse that Chu Fengmian had ever seen. As long as a martialist hadn't condensed a divine pulse, the mysterious divine pulse elixir would be useful to them, no matter how strong they were. Chu Fengmian could use the mysterious divine pulse elixir to exchange for what he needed. There were many sacred elixirs in Hai Changa's empty ring. Chu Fengmian calculated that, in addition to the treasures in Hai Changa's empty ring, he could still refine a few more furnaces of small flying immortal pills. Chu Fengmian walked towards the Sword Lake. The Sword Lake was one of the holy lands of the Sea Sword sect. It was the place where the experts of the Sea Sword sect had left their sword intent. The disciples of the Sea Sword sect could go there to comprehend their sword intent and sword art. The Sword Dao totem was also in the Sword Lake. After inspecting Hai Changa's spatial ring, Chu Fengmian prepared to leave for the Sword Lake. However, at that moment, a few figures suddenly descended and blocked his path. These figures all had the strength of a half-step celestial being, and were figures of the elder generation of the Sea Sword sect. Chu Fengmian recognized these people at a glance. Law enforcement elders, what's the matter? These half-step celestial realm powerhouses were all Ocean's Word sect's law enforcement elders. They had the authority to enforce the law, and their status was much higher than ordinary elders. Although only half-step celestial realm powerhouses could assume the position of Sea Sword sect's elder, there were also differences in strength among the elders of different positions. For example, the elders who guarded the mission hall and were responsible for issuing missions were almost the weaker ones among the elders of the Sea Sword sect. As for the law enforcement elders, they were responsible for supervising the sect's disciples. Naturally, their strength was the strongest. Chu Fengmian could see at a glance that the strength of these law enforcement elders in front of him was almost at the level of Linlang Jie. They were much stronger than ordinary half-step celestial beings. 14th Young Master. These law enforcement elders descended and looked at Chu Fengmian. Their postures were also very polite, and they did not look overbearing. However, Chu Fengmian would not let his guard down. The arrival of these law enforcement elders proved that the higher-ups of the Sea Sword sect had their eyes on him. After all, Chu Fengmian's strength had soared so much in such a short time. It was inevitable that he would be suspected by the higher-ups. Chu Fengmian did not want to attract attention, but Hai Changa's attack had also disrupted Chu Fengmian's plan. Now, Chu Fengmian could only take one step at a time. May I know why the law enforcement elders are here? Could it be that I have done something that violated the sect's rules? Chu Fengmian looked at the law enforcement elders and spoke, without any change in his expression. Of course not. We are here this time under the sect master's orders to invite the 14th young master to the main hall. One of the law enforcement elders looked at Chu Fengmian and said with a smile, "The 14th young master defeated Hai Changa this time. The sect master has not seen a disciple for a long time. It seems that the sect master is very satisfied with the 14th young master. The sect master wants to see him?" Chu Fengmian was slightly stunned. The sect master of the Sea Sword sect had been a famous figure for a long time. He had been the sect master for thousands of years. Under his leadership, the Sea Sword sect had become stronger. In the eyes of the disciples of the Sea Sword sect, the sect master was incomparably mysterious. Hai Shirsi had never seen him with his own eyes. Naturally, he did not know anything about him. The sect master of the Sea Sword sect wanted to see Chu Fengmian. In fact, he probably wanted to find out the truth of Chu Fengmian's identity. Chu Fengmian was also worried that the sect master of the Sea Sword sect might find out something. However, if he did not meet the sect master now, Chu Fengmian's plan would be completely ruined. However, Chu Fengmian thought that his disguise as Hai Shirsi was flawless. There was no harm in meeting the mysterious sect master. Is that so? Elders, please lead the way. Chu Fengmian thought for a long time, but his expression did not change as he spoke. Let's go. The disciplinary elders did not waste any time. They waved their hands and summoned a spatial tunnel, which they proceeded into. The main hall of the Sea Sword sect was located in an incomparably hidden place. It would only be opened when the Sea Sword sect received some important figures. Normally, if one wanted to enter, only a few elders who were valued could open the spatial passage and enter. Chu Fengmian stepped into the spatial passage and followed the elders all the way into the main hall. As soon as he stepped into the main hall, Chu Fengmian felt a shocking sword intent enveloping him. This sword intent was not emitted from a person. Instead, it was emitted from a tall stone statue in the center of the palace. A stone statue actually possessed such a shocking sword intent. Chu Fengmian raised his head and glanced at the stone statue. He thought for a moment and recognized the origin of the stone statue. The Sea Sword Emperor, the founding ancestor of the Sea Sword sect. Only his stone statue was qualified to be enshrined in the main hall. End of chapter. Chapter 1925. The Sea Sword Emperor's swordsmanship was unparalleled in the Sea Clan. That was why he fused his swordsmanship with the Sea Clan's martial skills and created the Sea Sword sect's swordsmanship. Chu Fengmian could faintly feel that the Sea Sword Emperor's swordsmanship had reached the peak of perfection and could reach the origin of swordsmanship. In terms of swordsmanship, it was enough to be on par with Chu Fengmian in his previous life. However, Chu Fengmian had lived 2 lives in this life. His understanding of swordsmanship had far surpassed his previous life. He had even comprehended the secrets of the swordsmanship totem and the incomplete swordsmanship. He had touched the threshold of the origin of swordsmanship. In terms of understanding of swordsmanship, Chu Fengmian had completely surpassed his previous life and stepped into a new level. If Chu Fengmian wanted to, he could turn into a stone statue after death and have such power. The stone statue in front of him was actually not carved by others. It was transformed after the death of the Sea Sword Emperor. So, even after so many years, it still had such sword intent. Ordinary disciples of the Sea Sword sect would be suffocated by the sword intent when they walked into the hall. Of course, Chu Fengmian didn't feel anything. He stood quietly in the hall. Sect Master, the 14th young master has been brought here. Several law-enforcing elders walked in and said to the depths of the hall. In the face of this sword intent, his expression didn't change. He didn't panic at all. Not bad. I didn't expect such a person to appear in the Sea Sword sect. A figure suddenly descended in front of the stone statue. It was an old man. There was no aura or sword intent on him. However, Chu Fengmian's eyes looked carefully. Only then did he see that the old man's small body contained an extremely powerful force. This person's strength was unbelievably strong. Although Chu Fengmian could see that the old man was still in the half-step celestial realm, his strength was on the same level as Yu Wuhan and Mad Dragon Emperor. As long as the old man wanted to, he could also cross the celestial tribulation at any time, become an immortal, and step into the celestial realm like Mad Dragon Emperor. Chu Fengmian knew that this old man was the mysterious sect master of the Sea Sword sect. First, there was Yu Wuhan, and now there is the leader of the Sea Sword sect. I wonder how many people with such strength are still hiding in the Songhai Star Zone. Although there are not many celestial realm people in the Songhai Star Zone on the surface, they are all hiding like this. Chu Fengmian looked at the old man and couldn't help but think. Yu Wuhan and the Sea Sword sect master were both people who could step into the celestial realm at any time if they wanted to. They did not choose to transcend the celestial tribulation because they had their own reasons. It was not because they could not transcend the tribulation. Speaking of which, the number of celestial realm elites in the Songhai Star region was not many. They could be counted on one hand. But now that Chu Fengmian saw Yu Wuhan and the sect master of the Sea Sword sect in front of him, Chu Fengmian understood that there might be more experts like them who suppressed their realms and were unwilling to undergo the Deva tribulation. It was not impossible for these people to be called celestial realm powerhouses. Chu Fengmian originally thought that the only person he needed to be wary of in the Sea Sword sect was the overlooking Sword Sea Emperor. But now, if the Sea Sword sect master were to fight with Chu Fengmian, it would be extremely difficult for Chu Fengmian to defeat him. Chu Fengmian had always underestimated the Songhai Star Zone. After all, it was a second-grade continent. Its overall strength was completely different from third-grade continents like the Daluotian Star Zone and the Azure Dragon Star Zone. With Chu Fengmian's current strength, it was impossible for him to wander freely in the Songhai Star Zone. Hai Shirsi, it is said that you obtained an opportunity from Gu Hai that caused your strength to skyrocket? The Sea Sword Sect Master suddenly spoke. The moment he spoke, he looked at Chu Fengmian. That gaze seemed to be able to see through everything about Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian understood that the Sea Sword Sect Master was probing him. A force like the Sea Sword Sect would never allow outsiders to sneak into the sect. They had to investigate the identity of the person. Therefore, when the disciples of the Sea Sword Sect returned to the Sea Sword Sect, their identity would be investigated. Chu Fengmian's identity as Hai Shirsi had skyrocketed in strength in a short period of time, which would definitely arouse suspicion. But this time, the Sea Sword Sect Master had personally come to investigate. The moment the Sea Sword Sect Master made a move to investigate Chu Fengmian's identity, the law enforcement elders next to him also circulated their spiritual power and stared at Chu Fengmian. As long as Chu Fengmian showed the slightest sign of resistance, they would immediately attack and kill him. However, Chu Fengmian was already prepared. The various fortuitous encounters he had and the Dragon Clan's bloodline had already been concealed. The power he left behind was Hai Shirsi's power and the Sea Sword Sect's sword intent. That's right, it's the Sea Sword Sect's sword intent. It looks like you did obtain an opportunity to have such strength. The Patriarch of the Sea Sword Sect said slowly after checking for a while. You may leave. From now on, you will mainly serve the Sea Sword Sect. The position of the next sect master of the Sea Sword Sect will definitely belong to you. The Sea Sword Sect master's words painted a big picture for Chu Fengmian. However, Chu Fengmian vaguely felt that the Sea Sword Sect master's words didn't seem so sincere. He seemed to have some other thoughts. However, Chu Fengmian wasn't a disciple of the Sea Sword Sect. This time, he came to the Sea Sword Sect for the Sword Dao Totem. Naturally, he didn't notice it at all. After thanking him, Chu Fengmian turned into a streak of light and directly left the hall. Sect Master, what's the result? This Hai Shirsi isn't an outsider who sneaked into the Sea Sword Sect in disguise? After Chu Fengmian left, an enforcement elder came over and asked in surprise. Hai Shirsi's strength skyrocketed. It was so fast that these enforcement elders were a little doubtful whether this Hai Shirsi was a fake or not. After all, a person's strength had undergone an earth-shaking change in a short period of time. No, this Hai Shirsi's sword intent is indeed the sword intent of the Sea Sword Sect. His strength can be faked, but his sword intent can't. The Sea Sword Sect Master said sullenly. Furthermore, this person does have Gu Hai's aura. Not bad, it looks like he did go to Gu Hai and obtained an opportunity. An opportunity in Gu Hai. It is said that those who can enter Gu Hai and survive will become famous in the future. This Hai Shirsi is rather lucky. When the other enforcement elder reached this point, his tone suddenly changed, revealing a somewhat cold expression. In that case, doesn't this Hai Shirsi have an even better physical body than Hai Chang'e? End of this chapter. Chapter 1926. Yes, this Hai Shirsi is much better than Hai Chang'e. I originally chose Hai Chang'e, but I didn't expect that there would be a better choice. The Master of Ocean's Word Sect said with a look of ecstasy. My body will be broken in 5 days at most, and I need a new one. Unexpectedly, Hai Shirsi was sent here. Has the divine vein elixir been given to Hai Shirsi? Yes, it has. A law enforcement elder replied. Alright, when Hai Shirsi refines the Xiandao divine pulse elixir, it will be time for me to reconstruct my physical body. With Hai Shirsi's physical body, I will definitely be able to survive the Great Tribulation. The Master of Ocean's Word Sect laughed wildly. Then I will congratulate you in advance, Master. The law enforcement elders also burst into laughter. On the other side, Chu Fengmian left the hall and turned into a ray of light, flying towards the sword lake. This stone is indeed useful. It can hide from the master of Ocean's Word sect. Chu Fengmian flew all the way while holding the stone he got from Yu Wuhan. It was this stone that was contaminated with Gu Hai's aura, which made Chu Fengmian's words flawless. Now that his identity as Hai Shirsi had been confirmed by the master of Ocean's Word sect, no one would doubt it. However, Chu Fengmian faintly felt that the head of the Sea Sword sect did not call him over just to confirm his identity. It was not as simple as that. Whatever, I'll leave Ocean's Word sect and hide after I get the Sword Dao Totem. Chu Fengmian thought for a while and decided to ignore it. He flew all the way and soon arrived at the Sword Lake. The Sword Lake was the place where the disciples of Ocean's Word sect comprehended the Sword Dao. In Ocean's Word sect, where the sword was supreme, there were many disciples who comprehended the Sword Dao every day. There was a long line of people entering and exiting the Sword Lake. As soon as Chu Fengmian arrived, the disciples of the Ocean's Word sect all retreated, making a path for Chu Fengmian to enter. Chu Fengmian had defeated Hai Chang'e, and now he had become the #1 disciple of Ocean's Word sect. All the disciples, including the elders, were extremely respectful to him. After all, with his status as the #1 core disciple, he might even become the next sect master of the Sea Sword sect in the future. 14th Young Master, may I know why you have come to Sword Lake? The elders guarding the Sword Lake walked over when they saw Chu Fengmian and spoke with a fawning expression. I'm going to comprehend the Sword Dao Totem. Chu Fengmian didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. At the same time, he took out the jade talisman and handed it to the elder who was guarding the Sword Lake. Go and transfer 100,000 contribution points. The elder guarding the Sword Lake originally wanted to curry favor with Chu Fengmian. However, when he saw Chu Fengmian's cold attitude, he hurriedly received the jade talisman and paid with his contribution point. After that, the elder took out a jade talisman and seemed to be discussing something with someone. After a while, the elder walked over with a jade talisman in his hand. He handed it to Chu Fengmian and said, Brother Chu Fengmian, this is the jade talisman to enter the depths of the Sword Lake. 14th Young Master, with the jade talisman, you can meditate on the Sword Totem for 10 days. 100,000 contribution points could only allow one to meditate on the Sword Totem for 10 days. 10,000 contribution points a day was simply a sky-high price. It was no wonder that not many of the core disciples of the Seasword sect were qualified to meditate on the Sword Totem. However, 10 days was enough for Chu Fengmian. Let's go. Chu Fengmian took the jade talisman and turned into a stream of light, heading directly to the depths of the Sword Lake. There were forbidden formations everywhere in the Sword Lake. The disciples of the Seasword sect had to pay a lot of contribution points if they wanted to meditate on the sword wills left behind by the experts of the Seasword sect. Moreover, they could only choose to meditate on one place. If they secretly tried to meditate on another place, they would be mercilessly killed by the forbidden formations. However, the jade talisman Chu Fengmian was holding was of the highest quality among the Sword Lake jade talismans. The Sword Dao Totem was located in the deepest part of the Sword Lake. Chu Fengmian held the jade talisman and flew directly to the deepest part of the Sword Lake, ignoring all the forbidden formations. Looking from afar, he saw a wooden totem standing in the deepest part of the Sword Lake. Sword Dao Totem. The moment he saw the wooden totem, Chu Fengmian was overjoyed. Chu Fengmian finally saw the Sword Dao Totem of the Seasword sect. Chu Fengmian had gone through untold hardships to transform into Hai Shirsi and complete the mission for the Sword Dao Totem. As Chu Fengmian approached, he could clearly feel the shocking sword intent emitted from the Sword Dao Totem. The sword intent contained in the Sword Dao Totem wasn't ostentatious. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't be able to see the mystery of the Sword Dao Totem even if they approached it. But for sword cultivators with high attainments in the Sword Dao, they would be able to clearly feel the power of the sword Tao totem as soon as they approached it. Therefore, in some remote places, such as the Daluo star field, there weren't many people who knew the true value of the sword Tao totem. The sword Tao totem had even been auctioned off. There were many powerful sword cultivators in the Seasward sect, and there were even celestial realm powerhouses. Therefore, they clearly knew the value of the sword Tao totem and attached great importance to it. Chu Fengmian could feel that there was a spiritual consciousness near the sword Tao totem. It was shrouded in fear that someone would seize the opportunity to seize the sword Tao totem. Moreover, there were layers of restriction arrays set up on the sword Tao totem. When Chu Fengmian saw the power contained in some of these restrictive formations, he felt that they were extremely tricky to deal with. Some of these restriction arrays were personally set up by celestial realm powerhouses. It would be extremely difficult for Chu Fengmian to resolve them. However, Chu Fengmian had 10 days, so he wasn't in a hurry. Chu Fengmian walked to the sword Tao totem and sat down quietly, looking as if he had begun to comprehend it. The sword intent contained in this sword Tao totem is stronger than the one in my hand. Chu Fengmian thought as he felt the sword intent emitted from the sword Tao totem. Chu Fengmian had a total of 3 sword Tao totem in his hand. They were ranked 3rd, 4th, and 19th respectively. There were a total of 19 sword Tao totems. The higher the ranking of the sword Tao totem, the more mysterious the sword Tao totem was and the stronger the sword intent it contained. The sword intent contained in the sword Tao totem in front of him was more tyrannical than the sword Tao totem in Chu Fengmian's hand. This also proved that this sword principal totem was either the 1st or 2nd totem. Regardless of whether it was ranked 1st or 2nd, this sword Tao totem was extremely important to Chu Fengmian. End of chapter. Chapter 1927. As long as Chu Fengmian obtained this sword principal totem, his swordsmanship could be further improved. The incomplete swordsmanship in the sword principal totem was related to the sword principal origin. If Chu Fengmian wanted to comprehend the sword principal origin, he had to obtain all the sword principal totems. Chu Fengmian sat in front of the sword principal totem and injected his spiritual consciousness into it to explore the inhibition formation. The sword principal totem was hidden in the depths of the sword lake and was protected by countless inhibition formations. It was as difficult as ascending to heaven to seize it. Many of the inhibition formations were set up by experts in the celestial realm. Ordinary warriors, even warriors in the half-step celestial realm, would be killed by the inhibition formations if they wanted to seize the sword principal totem. However, Chu Fengmian was not so worried. He carefully looked at the inhibition formations. Suddenly, a stream of spiritual power was emitted from Chu Fengmian's body and injected into the sword principal totem. This stream of spiritual power entered the sword principal totem and turned into a vortex, constantly devouring the power of the inhibition formations. The sky-devouring secret skill had the ability to devour all the heavens. Chu Fengmian controlled a part of the sky-devouring origin. Although he did not have the ability to devour all the heavens, it was easy for him to deal with some inhibition formations. Chu Fengmian activated the sky-devouring secret skill and devoured the power of the inhibition formations in the sword principal totem little by little. The power of the countless inhibition formations in the sword principal totem was obliterated little by the sky-devouring secret skill. Of course, in order not to alert the enemy, Chu Fengmian did not break all the inhibition formations in one breath. He just emptied the spiritual power in them. In this way, the expert who set up the inhibition formations could not notice what was happening here. Chu Fengmian easily solved the restriction formation that had been set up in the sword Tao totem. However, compared to the inhibition formations in the sword principal totem, the spiritual consciousness that had been watching the sword lake was more troublesome. This spiritual awareness was almost always locked onto Chu Fengmian's body, watching his every move. As long as Chu Fengmian acted without thinking, he would attract the attention of this spiritual sense. Although the owner of this spiritual sense was only a half-step celestial being expert of the Sea tribe, it was not difficult for Chu Fengmian to kill him. However, Chu Fengmian did not have the ability to kill this person silently. Once this person spread the news, Chu Fengmian's identity would be exposed, and all the plans would be ruined. Wait. Chu Fengmian suppressed the thought of taking the initiative to attack. He just waited here. Chu Fengmian didn't believe that this spiritual awareness would keep checking on him for a total of 10 days while he was comprehending the sword Dao totem. As long as he found a gap, Chu Fengmian could seize the sword principle totem and escape. Time ticked by. During these days, Chu Fengmian didn't just wait. He was also comprehending the various mysteries of this sword principle totem. Although Chu Fengmian didn't have the ability to completely comprehend the mysteries of this sword principle totem in such a short time. During this time, Chu Fengmian confirmed one thing. This sword principle totem should be the second sword principle totem. This made Chu Fengmian a little disappointed. The higher the ranking of the sword principle totem, the stronger the swordsmanship it contained. If it was the sword principle totem ranked first, Chu Fengmian would benefit more after getting it. However, even if it was the sword principle totem ranked second, Chu Fengmian was still amazed by the swordsmanship in it. In just 7 days, Chu Fengmian comprehended dozens of swordsmanship from this sword principle totem. These swordsmanship were the most ancient swordsmanship, which was completely different from the simplified swordsmanship passed down from generation to generation. Each of them contained extremely strong power, which was almost no less than the swordsmanship of the Sea Sword sect. However, although the ancient swordsmanship recorded in this sword principle totem was powerful, it was extremely difficult to comprehend it. Even a sword principle grandmaster couldn't comprehend it thoroughly. It was obscure and difficult to understand. Only Chu Fengmian, who had already touched the threshold of the sword principle origin, could clearly comprehend these swordsmanship. These dozens of ancient swordsmanship were all integrated into the 9 regions swordsmanship by Chu Fengmian and became his power. After integrating these dozens of ancient swordsmanship, Chu Fengmian's power vaguely improved. Although there was no change in Chu Fengmian's realm, Chu Fengmian's strength had improved a lot. This was only the result of 7 days of comprehension. Chu Fengmian was eager to obtain the sword principle totem in just 7 days, which made him yearn for the rewards he would get after obtaining it. This person seems to have been staring at me the entire time. Could it be that my identity has been suspected? Chu Fengmian slowly withdrew the sword essence and thought in his heart with a frown. 7 days. Chu Fengmian had been looking for a gap in the elder's surveillance to seize the sword principle totem. However, the result disappointed Chu Fengmian. This elder had been watching Chu Fengmian for the past 7 days. He didn't relax at all. This also made Chu Fengmian feel extremely troubled. He even suspected that it was because his identity had been exposed and he was suspected by the people of Seaward sect. That was why they were watching him like this. However, Chu Fengmian soon overthrew this idea after thinking for a while. If Chu Fengmian's identity was exposed and he was seen through by the sect master of Seaward sect, Chu Fengmian wouldn't be sitting here. If he came to Sword Lake, the sect master of Seaward sect should have taken action to suppress Chu Fengmian when he was in the main hall. In the main hall, there was the support of the shocking sword essence contained in the stone statue of Seaward Emperor. Once the sect master of Seaward sect took action, he had great confidence in suppressing Chu Fengmian. If Chu Fengmian's identity was exposed, he wouldn't have taken action until now. Although his identity was not exposed, Chu Fengmian still felt that he was being watched. This feeling was getting closer and closer. It was as if Chu Fengmian was a prey targeted by a beast. A few figures appeared in the sky above the Sword Lake. These figures stood above the clouds, making it impossible for anyone to detect them. In just 7 days, he has comprehended the sword principle. Hai Shursi is really a sword principle genius. With such a monstrous body, why should I worry about not being able to step into the celestial realm? An old man was sizing up Chu Fengmian in the sky above the Sword Lake. His eyes were filled with greed. End of chapter. Chapter 1928. Chu Fengmian sat in front of the sword principal totem. With his eyes closed, a sword intent rose from Chu Fengmian's body. The sword intent was so strong that it soared into the sky and shrouded the entire Sword Lake. What a strong sword principle! How did Hai Shirsi comprehend such a strong sword principle at such a young age? The old man stared at Chu Fengmian and was shocked to see the sword intent erupting from his body. However, the greed in his eyes was even stronger. Such a heaven-defying sword principle. If I get this body, how strong will I be in the future? Rumble. While the old man was talking to himself, Chu Fengmian sat in front of him and comprehended the sword principle totem. The sword intent on his body became more and more turbulent. The sword intent could not be suppressed and burst out in all directions. Chu Fengmian's face was extremely serious and serious. The sword intent that erupted seemed to be brewing something, as if a person was ready to break through at any time. It was the most critical moment to comprehend the sword intent. Now is the time. Heaven and earth possession, reincarnation. The old man shouted coldly. At this moment, his body suddenly exploded and turned into a shadow. He suddenly fell from the sky and rushed towards Chu Fengmian. A burst of heaven and earth power suddenly descended and suppressed Chu Fengmian. The old man's figure rushed towards Chu Fengmian as if he wanted to enter Chu Fengmian's body. After waiting for so long, I finally made my move. However, Chu Fengmian suddenly opened his eyes the moment the old man's figure came to his side. The raging sword intent on Chu Fengmian's body also gradually calmed down. He looked at the old man with a faint smile on his face. His eyes met the old man's. The old man was none other than the sect master of Seaward sect that Chu Fengmian had met before. Chu Fengmian had always felt that someone was watching him and spying on him. Therefore, he deliberately pretended that he was about to make a breakthrough in sword principle in order to force this person out. Chu Fengmian was not surprised to see the sect master of Seaward sect suddenly make a move. Previously, when he was in the main hall, Chu Fengmian felt that the Sea Sword sect's sect master's words had a hidden meaning. Clearly, he didn't have any good intentions. Now that the sect master of the Sea Sword sect had intervened, the confusion in Chu Fengmian's heart suddenly cleared up. The sect master of the Sea Sword sect was actually planning to possess Chu Fengmian. The Tao of possession was typically only used by warriors or fey gods when their bodies were shattered and they were unable to reconstruct their bodies. Of course, there were also some martial artist fey immortals who did not have high aptitude. They could choose to possess martial artist fey immortals with higher aptitude. The sect master of Sea Sword sect wanted to possess Chu Fengmian. That was why he had been keeping an eye on Chu Fengmian. Just now, when Chu Fengmian was comprehending the Sword Tao totem and was about to make a breakthrough in Sword Tao, he suddenly attacked and possessed Chu Fengmian. However, the Sea Sword sect master didn't expect that Chu Fengmian had pretended to be about to break through just to lure him out. Hi 14? I didn't expect you to be prepared. Unfortunately, you still have to die here today. Your body is mine. The Sea Sword sect master saw that Chu Fengmian had noticed, so he simply didn't hide anymore. He laughed loudly and immediately urged his power to the extreme. This power entered Chu Fengmian's body and went straight for Chu Fengmian's soul. He wanted to destroy Chu Fengmian's soul directly so that this body would become ownerless and he could possess it. The Sea Sword sect master originally intended to launch a surprise attack, but since Chu Fengmian had reacted, he directly used a killing move. After all, he was an expert at the peak of the half-step celestial realm. It was a piece of cake for him to deal with a 9 tribulations Emperor Gu. The soul extermination technique. Among the countless martial techniques, it was considered an extremely mysterious one. Generally speaking, martial artists and fey immortals of the same realm would have similar soul power. Therefore, this kind of soul extermination technique was not very useful in the face of martial artists and fey immortals of the same realm. Therefore, few people practiced it. The sect master of the Sea Sword sect clearly had the intention of possessing someone else's body. His soul extermination technique was incomparably mysterious. A stream of spiritual energy turned into a sharp sword and slashed at Chu Fengmian's soul. This kind of competition of power was a confrontation of pure soul power. The Sea Sword sect master suddenly used this move. An ordinary Emperor Gu of the 9 tribulations would have been killed in an instant. However, when Chu Fengmian saw the sharp sword condensed from soul power slashing at him, a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. He also urged his soul power to attack. Bang! In the collision of soul power, the sharp sword condensed by the Sea Sword sect master's soul power was instantly shattered. However, there was no change on Chu Fengmian's face. On the other side, the sect master of the Sea Sword sect kept backing away. He had abandoned his body and tried to possess Chu Fengmian without caring about anything else. His soul force was his greatest power, but it had clearly been shattered by Chu Fengmian mercilessly. How can your soul be so powerful? Impossible, even a half-step celestial being doesn't have such a powerful soul. You're not Hai Shirsi, who are you? The Sea Sword sect master stared at Chu Fengmian and shouted in disbelief. Who am I? You don't have to care. Anyway, you're going to be a dead man soon. A sneer appeared at the corner of Chu Fengmian's mouth. Soul attacks were useful against others, but they were useless against Chu Fengmian. Having lived 2 lives, Chu Fengmian's soul and spiritual sense were infinitely powerful. His soul and spiritual sense were far above martial artists of the same realm. If the Sea Sword sect master chose to possess someone else, even if it was a half-step celestial being expert, he would have a very high chance of success with so many preparations. Unfortunately, he was targeting Chu Fengmian, a freak who had lived 2 lives. Sword out! Chu Fengmian's palm moved, and the ancestral dragon supreme sword was immediately unsheathed and slashed at the Sea Sword sect master. The Sea Sword sect master had already noticed that there was something wrong with Chu Fengmian's identity. He couldn't let him leave alive today. Moreover, the Sea Sword sect master was planning to possess Chu Fengmian, so there was no way Chu Fengmian would let him go. Run! The Sea Sword sect master saw Chu Fengmian's sword, and his figure flashed, turning into a ray of light and fleeing out of the sword lake. As long as he left the sword lake, he could call for the experts of the Sea Sword sect, and even let the Sea Sword sect's ancestor, the Emperor of the Sea Sword Sea, deal with Chu Fengmian. Originally, even in the sword lake, there were always experts of the Sea Sword sect monitoring. However, the Sea Sword sect master deliberately sealed the sword lake in order to prevent the news of him possessing Chu Fengmian from spreading. Now, he had shot himself in the foot. End of chapter. Chapter 1929. The Sea Sword sect's sect master had calculated everything, but never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that his possession would fail. After all, as a half-step celestial human realm expert, possession of any 9 tribulations Emperor Gu was a piece of cake. He had calculated for a long time but did not expect that Hai Shirsi was actually Chu Fengmian in disguise. Chu Fengmian, on the other hand, had an amazing opportunity. As a person who had lived 2 lives, his soul was far more powerful than martial artists of the same realm. It completely ruined the patriarch of the Sea Sword sect's plan. In order to possess Chu Fengmian, the Sea Sword sect master had already abandoned his physical body. Now, his strength was less than 30% of his peak. If the Sea Sword sect master still had his physical body and strength at his peak, he might not be afraid of Chu Fengmian. But now, he could only flee. Only by escaping from the sword lake could he attract the attention of the other Sea Sword sect expert. This escape light was pushed to the extreme and flew out of the sword lake. Want to escape? Since you want to possess me in this sword lake, then you shall die here today. Chu Fengmian looked at the Sea Sword Sect Master. Chu Fengmian knew exactly what the Sea Sword Sect Master was thinking. If the Sea Sword Sect Master was allowed to escape from the Sword Lake, it would really be troublesome. The Sword Lake was the sacred place of the Sea Sword Sect. It was located in the center of the Sea Sword Sect and had countless experts of the Sea Sword Sect. Even Chu Fengmian was vulnerable in front of the entire Sea Sword Sect. Moreover, there was also a celestial human realm expert in the Sea Sword Sect. Chu Fengmian would never let the Sea Sword Sect Master escape. But now, the formation that the Sea Sword Sect Master had set up to seal the Sword Lake was a great help to Chu Fengmian. In the Sword Lake, even if Chu Fengmian used all his strength, the outside world would not know. Seal. The power of ancestor Jianwang in Chu Fengmian's bloodline immediately erupted. As Chu Fengmian's big hand suddenly grabbed, the power of space immediately suppressed the Sea Sword Sect Master. The escape light of the Sea Sword Sect Master slowed down instantly. His speed was even slower than some divine sea realm and wind controlling realm martial artists. Kill! The moment he suppressed the master of the Sea Sword Sect with the power of space, Chu Fengmian also made his move. His escape light was extremely fast, catching up to the leader of the Sea Sword Sect in an instant. Facing the leader of the Sea Sword Sect, he mercilessly slashed down with his sword. Do you think you can still escape in front of me? Chu Fengmian looked at the leader of the Sea Sword clan and sneered. Immediately, his sword will erupted and condensed on the tip of his sword. He then slashed at the leader of the Sea Sword clan. Ah! The sect lord of the Seasword sect let out a blood-curdling scream as his soul was destroyed countless times. Every time his soul was destroyed, the Sea Sword Sect's sect master's strength would weaken a little. When his strength continued to weaken, he would no longer have the ability to reconstruct himself. Hi Shirsi, no, senior, don't kill me, I'm willing to let you be the master of the Sea Sword Sect. I'll let you comprehend the Sword Dao Totem. I can do anything for you. The Sea Sword Sect's sect master screamed loudly. He didn't want to die. He had always dreamed of reaching the celestial realm. He wanted to pass the celestial tribulation, which was why he seized others time and time again. The previous times, the Sea Sword Sect's sect master succeeded easily. He didn't expect to fail miserably this time, encountering Chu Fengmian, his nemesis. Hearing the words of the Sea Sword Sect's sect master, Chu Fengmian sneered. The Sea Sword Sect's sect master had possessed countless disciples of the Sea Sword Sect. No wonder the Sea Sword Sect was willing to pay a huge price to cultivate Hai Chang'e and Chu Fengmian. It turned out that they were all preparing for the Sea Sword Sect's sect master's possession. The profound Tao Divine Vein Elixir was probably given to the Sea Sword Sect's sect master for possession. Although Chu Fengmian wasn't a righteous person, he couldn't do something like possession of a disciple of his sect. Moreover, the Sea Sword Sect's sect master was planning to possess Chu Fengmian today. He had committed a capital crime that couldn't be redeemed. Die. The sword in Chu Fengmian's hand fell mercilessly, turning into a sword chi that slashed down. The Sea Sword Sect's sect master's soul was instantly killed hundreds of times by this sword chi. In the end, the Sea Sword Sect's sect master's soul was extremely weak and couldn't be reconstructed anymore. He died. Let's go and seize the Sword Principal Totem. After getting rid of the Sea Sword Sect's sect master, who had been watching Chu Fengmian, it was now time for Chu Fengmian to seize the Sword Principal Totem. The Sea Sword Sect's sect master had sealed the Sword Lake. If he didn't go out for too long, he would definitely be noticed by other experts of the Sea Sword Sect. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian had made all the preparations. His escape light arrived in front of the Sword Principal Totem in an instant. He didn't need to hide his cultivation level anymore. He immediately operated the sky-devouring secret technique and shrouded the Sword Principal Totem. Countless formations and restrictions operated in the sword principle totem, resisting the power of the sky-devouring secret technique. However, 99% of the power of the formations and restrictions in the sword principle totem had been quietly wiped out by Chu Fengmian with the sky-devouring secret technique. Now, even if it was fully operated, it couldn't resist the power of the sky-devouring secret technique. There was a boom. All the formations and restrictions on the sword principle totem were broken. Chu Fengmian grabbed with his right hand and the sword principle totem fell into his palm. Chu Fengmian put it into his empty ring and then rushed straight to the sky above the sword lake. Inside the sea sword sect, an ancient hall with a door that had been sealed for a long time and hadn't been opened for hundreds of years suddenly opened the moment the sword principle totem's restriction formation was broken. An earth-shattering sword intent burst out from the hall as a figure flew out of the hall. This shocking sword intent could be clearly felt by the entire sea sword sect. Many disciples of the sea sword sect showed some charm in their eyes when they felt the sword intent. However, the elders of the sea sword sect were shocked when they felt the shocking sword intent. They knew the origin of the sword intent. The Emperor of the Sword Sea. The sword intent was the ancestor of the sea sword sect and the only celestial realm expert in the sea sword sect. It came from the Emperor of the Sword Sea. The Emperor of the Sword Sea, who had been in seclusion for hundreds of years, suddenly came out of seclusion. And he was angry. The chilling power contained in the sword intent proved the Emperor of the Sword Sea's anger. What's going on? Why did the Emperor of the Sword Sea suddenly come out of seclusion? Is there an enemy invasion? Many elders of the sea sword sect were puzzled, but many of them found that the Emperor of the Sword Sea's escape light was heading in the direction of the Sword Lake. The Sword Lake. What happened? When everyone looked at the Sword Lake, an unbelievable scene suddenly happened. A crack suddenly appeared in the formation that had been covering the Sword Lake. End of chapter. Chapter 1930. Sword Lake, the sacred place of Seawall sect, contained the inheritance of Seawall sect's sword principle. In order to prevent the invasion of foreign enemies, the Sword Lake had always been the place with the most restrictive formations in Seawall sect. Especially the great formation that protected the Sword Lake, which enveloped above, was set up by a celestial realm powerhouse. Now, a crack had actually appeared on the formation, causing the elders of the sea sword sect to be extremely shocked. In addition to being shocked, many experts of Seawall sect suddenly understood that the Emperor of Overlooking Sword Sea had awakened because something had happened in the Sword Lake. The crack was just the beginning. Then, more and more cracks appeared above the Sword Lake formation, and the entire formation was on the verge of collapse. Crack. Suddenly, a figure rushed out from the center of the countless cracks. This formation is really difficult to deal with. Fortunately, I have mastered the sky-devouring origin and the sky-devouring secret technique. It's enough to destroy the power of the formation. This figure was Chu Fengmian, who had seized the sword principle totem. After seizing the sword principle totem, Chu Fengmian no longer had to hide his identity. Now, he had to leave Seawall sect as soon as possible. Chu Fengmian had already sensed that a shocking sword intent had awakened. The owner of this sword intent was definitely a celestial realm expert, the Emperor of Overlooking Sword Sea. The sword principle totem was the treasure of Seawall sect. There must be a restrictive formation set up by the Emperor of Overlooking Sword Sea. The moment Chu Fengmian broke the restrictive formation on the sword principle totem, the Emperor of Overlooking Sword Sea would have sensed it and come out of seclusion. Looking from afar, Chu Fengmian saw a figure flying towards the Sword Lake. It was a middle-aged man who looked much younger than the sect master of Seawall sect. However, Chu Fengmian knew that this middle-aged man was much older than the sect master of Seawall sect. He was the patriarch of Seawall sect. He was also the only celestial realm expert in Seawall sect, the Emperor of Overlooking Sword Sea. Chu Fengmian glanced over and saw that the Emperor of Overlooking Sword Sea was holding a spiritual sword. He turned into a ray of light and flew towards Chu Fengmian. The speed of this escape light was extremely fast. Chu Fengmian had never seen such a fast sword light. Although it hadn't completely transformed into an ultimate immortal weapon, it wasn't inferior to Chu Fengmian's ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword and Titanic Gate Godly Sword. The overlooking Sword Sea Emperor looked at Chu Fengmian with boundless killing intent. The moment he felt the killing intent, Chu Fengmian shuddered all over. He sensed great danger, just like when he was targeted by the Yuan Whale Emperor. Neither the overlooking Sword Ocean Monarch nor the Origin Whale Monarch were existences that Chu Fengmian couldn't fight against. Let's go. Chu Fengmian didn't hesitate at all. After breaking the formation above the Sword Lake, he transformed into the appearance of Ancestor Tianlong and quickly flew out of the Sea Sword sect. Only death awaited Chu Fengmian if he fought the Emperor of the Linjian Sea. Although Chu Fengmian was strong now, he was still far from being a true Celestial Realm expert. Chu Fengmian could only injure the Mad Dragon Emperor in front of him. The overlooking Sword Sea Emperor was a veteran Celestial Realm expert. His strength wasn't something that the newly ascended Mad Dragon Emperor could compare with. Chu Fengmian transformed into Ancestor Tianlong and fled out of the Sea Sword sect at several times the speed. You want to escape? Evil creature, put down the Sword Dao Totem. How dare you steal my Sea Sword sect's Sword Dao Totem? You're courting death. Waterfront Ocean Monarch saw Chu Fengmian's fleeing figure and chased after Chu Fengmian even faster. The Sword Dao Totem contained the restriction formations he'd set up. Now that Chu Fengmian had broken all of them, it was clear that the totem had fallen into Chu Fengmian's hands. There was no way he'd let Chu Fengmian take the totem. A mere 9 tribulations Emperor Gu dares to steal from my Sea Sword sect? If I let you go, I won't be worthy of the title of Ocean Emperor. The overlooking Sword Sea Emperor let out a long roar and sped up countless times as he chased after Chu Fengmian. The speed of this escape light was even faster than Chu Fengmian's. Even though Chu Fengmian had transformed into Ancestor Tianlong and used the power of Ancestor Tianlong's bloodline to push his speed to the extreme, he still couldn't outrun the overlooking Sword Sea Emperor. This was absolute strength, the absolute strength of a Celestial Realm expert. If this continues, the overlooking Sword Sea Emperor will catch up to me. Chu Fengmian frowned when he saw the Emperor of the Waterfront Sea closing in. The Emperor of the Waterfront Sea's speed was beyond Chu Fengmian's imagination. Seal! Chu Fengmian waved his hand and condensed the power of Ancestor Tianlong in his palm. He used the power of space to suppress the overlooking Sword Sea Emperor and delay him. Space control? Ancestor Tianlong's bloodline? You have some ability, but do you really think you can delay me with just a few moves? The overlooking Sword Sea Emperor sneered when he sensed the suppression of space. His sword flashed and several rays of sword light swept out. The suppression of space on the overlooking Sword Sea Emperor was completely shattered. It was useless. Chu Fengmian wanted to delay the overlooking Sword Sea Emperor with the power of space, but it was useless against him. A Celestial Realm expert is truly terrifying. Chu Fengmian's eyes were cold. Even the strongest half-step Celestial Realm expert couldn't completely withstand Chu Fengmian's spatial suppression. They would be affected by at least 30%. But it was useless against the overlooking Sword Sea Emperor. Even if Chu Fengmian had Tianlong's bloodline and was a variant of the world, his methods were useless in the face of absolute power. I have no choice but to use this move. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with determination, and he suddenly clawed at the space in front of him. He wanted to tear apart space. If he forcefully tore apart space, Chu Fengmian wouldn't know where he would end up if he entered it. Chu Fengmian wasn't familiar with the Songhai starfield, so he might end up in some dangerous places. But seeing the overlooking Sword Sea Emperor chasing after him, Chu Fengmian had no other choice. He transformed into the primordial war dragon and tore apart space with his claw. Chu Fengmian's figure suddenly rushed towards the space crack. You want to escape by tearing apart space? Die for this, Emperor! Sword of the Sea God! Kill everything! Just as Chu Fengmian was about to rush into the space crack, he felt an intense danger. This feeling made Chu Fengmian quickly dodge to the side. A ray of sword light suddenly fell from the sky and slashed at Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian was very familiar with the power contained in the sword. It was the Sword of the Sea God. End of chapter. Chapter 1931. Sword of the Sea God. It was the strongest sword technique recorded in the Ocean's Word sect. Chu Fengmian was very familiar with this sword technique. Chu Fengmian had once disguised himself as Hai Shirsi and used this sword technique to defeat Hai Chang'e. The Sword of the Sea God displayed by the Emperor of the Overlooking Sword Sea was far more powerful than the sword technique Chu Fengmian had once displayed. Rumble! The shadow of the Ocean's Word Emperor merged with the figure of the Emperor of the Overlooking Sword Sea. It seemed as if the Ocean's Word Emperor had come back to life. The power of the sword slashed down from the sky, and the entire sky seemed to be split in half by the power of the sword. Everything was destroyed wherever the blade passed. It was unstoppable. This was the sword technique displayed by a true Celestial Realm expert. Chu Fengmian felt that if he hadn't dodged just now, he would have definitely died if he had been touched by the sword's edge. In terms of sword Dao comprehension, Chu Fengmian wasn't inferior to the Emperor of the Overlooking Sword Sea. In fact, he even surpassed the Emperor of the Overlooking Sword Sea. However, the gap between Chu Fengmian and the Emperor of the Overlooking Sword Sea was too great. A Celestial Realm elite could easily kill a half-step Celestial Realm martial artist or demon god with a casual strike. Even some famous half-step Celestial Realm experts, such as Heavenly King Huang, Young Emperor, and even Yu Wuhan, would be severely injured if they were hit by a Celestial Realm expert. A casual strike from a Celestial Realm expert could even destroy some small continents with a single punch. Moreover, the Emperor of the Overlooking Sword Sea was truly enraged. He attacked with the strongest sword technique of the Ocean's Word sect and used the Sword of the Sea God to kill Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's figure flashed and temporarily dodged the blade of the Sword of the Sea God, but he didn't dare to relax. Because in the next moment, several more blades slashed at Chu Fengmian from all directions. The Emperor of the Overlooking Sword Sea was truly enraged and didn't intend to give Chu Fengmian any chance to escape. Sword after sword, Chu Fengmian didn't even have time to breathe. Several sword edges blasted towards Chu Fengmian in an instant. They slashed from all directions at the same time, leaving Chu Fengmian with nowhere to run and nowhere to retreat. Three Suns Blazing Sword. Chu Fengmian also knew that there was no way out. He unsheathed his Titanic Gate Divine Sword at the same time. On the edges of these two spiritual swords, a colorless flame burned. The pure Yang Heavenly Fire and Chu Fengmian's sword intent merged into one. Suddenly, a sword slashed out. The sky turned into a sea of fire and collided with the Emperor of the approaching sword ocean. The two forces collided in the air and shattered. Even Chu Fengmian was forced to take several steps back. He was slightly injured by the rebounding force. What kind of swordsmanship was this? Immortal swordsmanship? It's even more profound than the Sea Sword sect's sword arts? The monarch's eyes flashed with surprise when he saw Chu Fengmian block his sword. After all, Chu Fengmian was only Emperor Gu of the Nine Tribulations. He was no different from an ant in his eyes. Yet, he was able to block his sword. The Sea Emperor of Linjian saw through the reason why Chu Fengmian could block his sword. It was because Chu Fengmian's sword technique was even more profound than the Sea Sword sect's sword technique. The Sea Sword sect's swordsmanship had barely reached the level of an immortal art. With the monarch's strength, his swordsmanship was a pure immortal art. Yet, Chu Fengmian's swordsmanship was even better than his. This proved that Chu Fengmian's swordsmanship was among the best even among immortal arts. Interesting. You have such a comprehension of the sword Dao at such a young age. This emperor doesn't want to kill you. I'll capture you and nurture you well. You can become a servant of my sea sword sect and serve my sect. The monarch looked at Chu Fengmian with interest. Although Chu Fengmian's swordsmanship could resist him, Chu Fengmian was still an ant that he could slaughter at will. He could crush at will. Is that so? I'm afraid you don't have the ability to do so. Chu Fengmian shouted and unsheathed his sword again. This time, the power of the stars suddenly descended and condensed in Chu Fengmian's sword. Voracious Wolf, Giant Door, Lutsuan, Heavenly Mystery. The first 4 styles of the 9 profound immortal art burst out at the same time. The moment the sword was slashed out, the sword chi and the power of the stars gathered together and turned into a galaxy. It blasted out and shrouded the imperial capital of Linjian Sea in the sword chi galaxy. Within the sword chi galaxy, hundreds of sword chi slashed at the monarch at the same time, annihilating everything within it. Another swordsmanship? This swordsmanship seems to be the power of the 9 profound immortal venerates 9 profound immortal art. You've actually turned the 9 profound immortal art into a swordsmanship? Seeing the sword chi galaxy, the overlooking sword sea emperor was shocked. He recognized that the power of Chu Fengmian's sword came from the 9 profound immortal art. But now, Chu Fengmian was using the 9 profound immortal art in the form of a swordsmanship. This proved that Chu Fengmian had transformed the 9 profound immortal art into a swordsmanship. It was as difficult as creating a new swordsmanship. It was comparable to the swordsmanship created by the ocean's word monarch. Good, a sword genius. I didn't expect to meet such a genius. It's a pity to have you as a servant. I'll suppress you and make you comprehend swordsmanship every day. I'll make the swordsmanship you comprehend be used by me. The overlooking sword sea emperor laughed loudly. Suddenly, his sword flashed and slashed out again. Rumble! As the sword overlooking sea emperor slashed out with his sword, the sword chi star river that enveloped him was completely destroyed. The sword chi galaxy didn't even have the ability to threaten the monarch. It was broken with a wave of his hand. Celestial realm experts are truly terrifying when they're truly angry. Chu Fengmian felt a chill in his heart. Normally, when Chu Fengmian fought with others, he would crush them with his tyrannical strength. But now, when he encountered the Emperor of Waterfront Sword Sea, Chu Fengmian's most tyrannical swordsmanship was no match for him. This was the true strength of a celestial realm expert. Even if the monarch's swordsmanship wasn't as good as Chu Fengmian's, he completely crushed Chu Fengmian in terms of strength. Chu Fengmian was already close to his limit to be able to withstand the monarch's continuous attack. Even Chu Fengmian, who had experienced countless battles of life and death, couldn't withstand such threatening swordsmanship. Chu Fengmian's current situation was extremely dangerous. As long as Chu Fengmian relaxed a little, he would fall into an irrecoverable situation. He was walking on a tightrope and couldn't relax. End of chapter. Chapter 1932. I must escape. Only death awaited Chu Fengmian if he continued to fight with the Sea Emperor of the Near Sword Sea. However, Chu Fengmian was now entangled with the Sea Emperor of the Near Sword Sea. It was not easy for him to escape. While Chu Fengmian was pondering, the Emperor suddenly moved. He took a step forward, approached Chu Fengmian, and slashed down with his sword. The moment the sword slashed down, streaks of sword aura suddenly transformed into a pagoda and pressed down. Infinite transformations. When one reached great success in sword Dao, they could do anything with their sword art. He didn't plan on killing Chu Fengmian. Instead, he wanted to capture him alive. He wanted to use Chu Fengmian. The power of the pagoda was no less than that of a true suppressive immortal art. Chu Fengmian felt immense pressure. His body and power were completely suppressed by the pagoda. Damn it! You want to suppress me? Absolutely impossible. Ting Serpent Bloodline, Progenitor Tianlong Bloodline. Heaven-devouring beast bloodline, devour the heavens! At this critical juncture, Chu Fengmian couldn't care less about holding back. All of his bloodline power erupted at this moment, and his strength soared more than tenfold in an instant. He gathered his spiritual power and grasped at the air. A gust of heaven-devouring power erupted as he used the heaven-devouring secret technique, shrouding Chu Fengmian's head. The heaven-devouring secret technique resisted the suppression of the sword aura pagoda. Ting serpent bloodline? Heaven-devouring beast bloodline? How is this possible? How can one person control so many innate divine beast bloodlines? The emperor was shocked to see the bloodline power erupting from Chu Fengmian. Then, his gaze shrouded Chu Fengmian. His gaze was like a torch, and all of Chu Fengmian's secrets were exposed. Half-step celestial realm and monster deities couldn't see through Chu Fengmian's hidden power, but it couldn't be hidden from true celestial realm powerhouses. The overlooking Sword Sea Emperor stared at Chu Fengmian and quickly took in all of his secrets. Genesis Chi, a variant of heaven and earth. You've actually transcended a heaven-defying tribulation? The Sword Monarch's voice trembled in disbelief. A heaven-defying tribulation, a variant of heaven and earth. It was an incomparably ancient myth. Those who could transcend a heaven-defying tribulation could only be found in myth. But Chu Fengmian had really done it. He'd merged with Genesis Chi and become a variant of heaven and earth. Good. Your body has been fused with primeval energy, and you've become a variant of heaven and earth. Your flesh is no different from the flesh of a real connate godbeast. I'll kill you and devour your bloodline to become a variant of heaven and earth. The emperor looked at Chu Fengmian with extreme excitement. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he immediately attacked. At this moment, the emperor no longer wanted to capture Chu Fengmian alive, serve him, and comprehend sword arts for him. None of this was as beneficial as directly killing Chu Fengmian and devouring his flesh. As long as he could kill Chu Fengmian and devour his flesh, he could also become a variant of heaven and earth. He'd become an existence comparable to connate divine beasts. Connate divine beasts were even stronger than immortal emperors. Just the thought of devouring Chu Fengmian and becoming such a heaven-defying existence made him excited to the extreme. He couldn't help but tremble from excitement. His only thought now was to kill Chu Fengmian. The tip of his sword changed in an instant. There was only slaughter in it. Suddenly, dozens of sword tips slashed out. Every move was fatal. It was all to kill Chu Fengmian. Not good, he wants to kill me. Chu Fengmian was nervous to the extreme after seeing the emperor's sudden change. If the Sea Emperor wanted to capture Chu Fengmian alive, Chu Fengmian would have some leeway to deal with him. Chu Fengmian was in a stalemate with the emperor, looking for an opportunity to escape. After all, the emperor couldn't use his full strength if he wanted to capture Chu Fengmian alive. But now that the emperor of the Linjian Sea wanted to kill him, he didn't care anymore and unleashed his full strength, leaving no room for Chu Fengmian to fight back. The pressure on Chu Fengmian multiplied. Each and every one of these dozens of sword edges was fatal. Chu Fengmian's body would be torn to shreds, and he would die on the spot. Four-sided hurricane sword. Chu Fengmian roared. Several thousand strands of sword energy flew out from the world-edge sword case on his back and coiled around his sword. As Chu Fengmian attacked, sword energy enveloped the blade and turned into dozens of sword energy tornadoes that clashed with the Emperor of overlooking Sword Sea. It's useless. Your sword technique is good, but you're too weak. You can't even use 1% of your sword technique's true power. If you were in the same realm as me, I wouldn't be your opponent today. Unfortunately, you're just a little Emperor Gu of the 9 tribulations. The Emperor flickered and sent out more sword light. He had nothing to fear. As long as he kept attacking Chu Fengmian would eventually show a flaw. Chu Fengmian had to deal with his sword with all his strength. Otherwise, he would be injured or killed. One after another, the swords slashed out. Chu Fengmian found it more and more difficult to resist. Chu Fengmian and the Emperor were two realms apart, especially the celestial realm. Mortal immortals had other realms that couldn't be crossed. The Emperor didn't attack by force, but kept wearing down Chu Fengmian's strength. If the Emperor tried to kill Chu Fengmian would have a chance to escape. But now, the Emperor of Linjian had been sealing the space around Chu Fengmian and only used ordinary sword arts to deal with him. Even if Chu Fengmian wanted to escape, he could escape in any direction. This overlooking Sword Sea Emperor is extremely difficult to deal with. Chu Fengmian found it very tricky. The Emperor didn't have the arrogance of a Celestial Realm expert. Generally, Celestial Realm experts would use all their strength to kill Chu Fengmian when they saw that he was just a Emperor Gu of the 9 tribulations. They wouldn't waste so many tricks. In this case, Chu Fengmian could find a chance to escape. Back in the chaotic ocean, the Origin Whale Emperor didn't take Chu Fengmian seriously. That was why Chu Fengmian could find a chance to escape. But the Emperor was different from the Origin Whale Emperor. A lion would use all its strength to catch a rabbit. Chu Fengmian couldn't find any chance to escape. End of chapter. Chapter 1933. A Celestial Realm expert is so difficult to deal with. Chu Fengmian had underestimated a Celestial Realm expert before. Indeed, Chu Fengmian's realm could only confuse the 9 tribulations Emperor Gu to a certain extent. If the Emperor of Linjian thought Chu Fengmian was an ordinary 9 tribulations Emperor Gu, then Chu Fengmian could find an opportunity to escape. But the Celestial Realm experts had different personalities. The Emperor of Linjian was the most cautious one. He was confident in his victory against Chu Fengmian. Because of this, he was not in a hurry at all. It could be said that the Emperor of Linjian was Chu Fengmian's nemesis. Chu Fengmian's surprise attack had no effect. Encountering such a Celestial Realm expert was the most troublesome character for Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian was resisting the sword qi while thinking hard, looking for an opportunity. The Emperor of Linjian just looked at Chu Fengmian with a sneer. He was not in a hurry. As long as Chu Fengmian could not resist and was injured, then he could easily kill Chu Fengmian. Especially in the Seasword sect, the Emperor of Linjian was not worried that someone would come to save Chu Fengmian. The time, place, and people were all on his side. This little guy is only in the realm of 9 tribulations Emperor Gu, but he can resist my attacks for so long. It seems that this person has another fortuitous encounter. I don't know where such a monster came from. Chu Fengmian was definitely the most powerful 9 tribulations Emperor Gu that the Emperor of Linjian had ever seen. Not to mention the 9 tribulations Emperor Gu, even among the martial artists and demon immortals of the half-step celestial realm, there were very few who could withstand so many attacks from him. Who is this person? How can the 9 tribulations Emperor Gu fight with the Emperor of Linjian for so long? No wonder Hai Shirsi's strength skyrocketed so quickly. Someone is impersonating him. How dare he steal the sword totem? This kid is tired of living. Several Seasword sect elders also gathered at the side, but none of them made a move. Since the Emperor of Linjian was personally making a move, there was naturally no need for them to make a move. That kid can't hold on much longer. Suddenly, one of the elders spoke. Chu Fengmian's figure, but he did not notice the sudden sword qi behind him. Boundless defense, but it only shattered half of it. The other half of the sword qi directly pierced into Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian retreated again and again with a pale face. This half of the sword qi entered Chu Fengmian's body and instantly destroyed his internal organs. Although it was temporarily suppressed, it was still destroying Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian had no choice but to divide his strength to suppress it. This Emperor Gu was Emperor Gu Ning with Linjian Emperor Linjian, sword with him to die with him. He's a 9 tribulation ancient emperor after all. No matter how heaven-defying he is, he's no match for the Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea. was with him. Hai Fengmian's edition. The overlooking Sword Ocean Emperor saw this scene as well. The moment he saw Chu Fengmian injured, his main body suddenly moved. In an instant, the body of the Emperor Lin Jian's sword merged with the spiritual sword in his hand, turning into a killing blow that slashed at Chu Fengmian. The power of this killing blow was even more terrifying than the sword of the sea god. Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a smile just as the killing blow was about to kill him. Finally, he can't help but make a move himself. The Emperor of the Overlook Sword Sea had become one with his sword. He had condensed all his strength into this killing blow, and had also removed the seal around him. This was the opportunity that Chu Fengmian had been waiting for. Devour the heavens! Boom! Inside Chu Fengmian's body, the heaven-devouring secret skill suddenly broke out and devoured the half of the sword qi that had entered Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian deliberately endured the sword qi just now. Although it did not feel good, the Emperor Lin Jian's sword could not help but make a move himself. This was Chu Fengmian's only chance. However, this was also the most dangerous moment. If Chu Fengmian couldn't withstand this fatal blow, he wouldn't be able to escape. He would probably be killed by the waterfront Sword Ocean Emperor in an instant. An ancient jar appeared in Chu Fengmian's hand. The jar of the Human Emperor. A broken apex immortal weapon. This jar was Chu Fengmian's final trump card. Primordial Human Emperor, enlighten all living beings. Chu Fengmian roared again and again. The jar of the Human Emperor suddenly took on the appearance of the Human Emperor halberd in his hand. Now, the Renhuang jar in Chu Fengmian's hand had already condensed 7 fragments. It already had some of the ancient Renhuang jar's power. The primordial Human Emperor had swept across the world with the halberd and established the status of the human race. The halberd of the Renhuang was formed. Chu Fengmian held the halberd of the Renhuang in his hand. It had the might that swept across the heavens in the past. He swept it towards the Emperor of the approaching Sword Sea. What is this? An apex immortal weapon? A true apex immortal weapon? How is this possible? How could such a thing be in your hands? No one would have thought that Chu Fengmian still had a trump card at this time, and that it was so frightening. Apex immortal weapon, the Human Emperor jar. The Emperor Lin Jian's sword was a celestial realm powerhouse, but he had only heard of apex immortal weapons and had never seen one before. The spirit sword in his hand was called an immortal weapon. Although there was only one word difference between it and an apex immortal weapon, the difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. Moreover, the Human Emperor jar was a spirit weapon of the primordial Human Emperor. Even among apex immortal weapons, it was an incomparably tyrannical existence. Chu Fengmian suddenly swept out with the Human Emperor halberd, giving the Emperor Lin Jian's sword no time to react. He could only clash with the halberd with his killing blow. This was the first time Chu Fengmian had used the Human Emperor jar after transcending the heaven-defying tribulation and becoming a worldly variant. Previously, when Chu Fengmian used the jar, he felt a sense of strain, as if he didn't deserve to use the jar's power at all. The jar was an apex immortal weapon. Even if it was broken, it wasn't something that anyone could control. Previously, Chu Fengmian had barely been able to control the jar. He couldn't unleash its power at all. It was as if he'd obtained a treasure and couldn't unleash its power at all. He could only use it to smash people. But this time, when Chu Fengmian used the jar again, he felt a telepathic connection with it. After Chu Fengmian had transcended the heaven-defying tribulation and become a worldly variant, the jar seemed to have recognized him as its master. This made the jar's power increase countless times. Even Chu Fengmian hadn't expected the jar's power to be so tyrannical this time. Even though it was the Emperor Lin Jian's sword's killing blow, Chu Fengmian wasn't afraid at all. End of chapter. Chapter 1934. Chu Fengmian held the Human Emperor's halberd in his hand and met the Emperor's fatal strike head-on. Chu Fengmian didn't know any halberd techniques, nor had he used the halberd much. But now, when Chu Fengmian held the human emperor's halberd, he didn't feel the slightest bit unfamiliar. He was incomparably familiar with it. The human emperor's halberd was like a part of his body. This was the power of the human emperor jar after it recognized Chu Fengmian as its master. The jar was an extreme immortal weapon. Even if it was broken, it knew how to fight alongside its master. Break! Chu Fengmian held the halberd in his hand and clashed with the fatal strike in the air. The heavens seemed to be on the verge of shattering under the collision. The entire seaward sect was on the verge of collapse, swaying constantly as countless palaces collapsed. The Emperor of the Sword overlooking sea also felt the power of the human emperor's halberd. He'd used all his trump cards in this strike. It was the so-called strongest strike of the Emperor of the Sword overlooking sea. As a celestial realm expert, the Emperor of the Sword overlooking sea went all out in the face of the human emperor's halberd. 99% of the power of the collision was neutralized by the halberd, but even this little bit of backlash almost shattered Chu Fengmian's body. The Emperor of the Sword overlooking sea's full-strength strike was really too strong. It was far beyond Chu Fengmian's imagination. If the Emperor Jar hadn't recognized Chu Fengmian as its master at this time and erupted with several times more power, it would have been replaced by the Emperor Jar in its previous state. Under this collision, Chu Fengmian would definitely be killed. Not even his bones would be left. There was no suspense. But even with the human emperor's halberd erupting with several times more power, Chu Fengmian still felt that he couldn't resist the Emperor of the Sword overlooking sea. The Emperor's halberd in his hand showed signs of shattering. Although the jar in Chu Fengmian's hand had condensed 7 fragments, it wasn't truly complete after all. It was only a broken extreme immortal weapon. Under such a huge force, the human emperor's halberd couldn't withstand it and was knocked back into the human emperor's jar. Even with the help of the human emperor's halberd, it's still impossible for me to truly defeat a celestial realm expert. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but marvel at this scene. Even the halberd of the emperor couldn't defeat sword overlooking sea monarch despite being several times stronger. The strength of the celestial realm was indeed different from that of the half-step celestial realm. This huge threshold represented the difference between immortals and mortals. Although he couldn't defeat the Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea, with the help of the human Emperor's halberd, Chu Fengmian was able to find an opportunity to retreat. Go! The sharpness of the halberd of the human Emperor forced the Sea Emperor to retreat temporarily. Chu Fengmian seized the opportunity and immediately flew out of the Sea Sword sect with the halberd in hand. The Sea Sword sect's mountain-guarding grand formation had been activated. The inescapable net was moving towards Chu Fengmian, trying to trap him within. With the human emperor's halberd in hand, Chu Fengmian suddenly stabbed forward and broke a gap in the mountain-guarding grand formation of the Sea Sword sect. Immediately, Chu Fengmian turned into a ray of light and rushed out. With the sword principal totem in hand, Chu Fengmian only needed to leave the Sea Sword sect. The vast Sea Star region was so big. If Chu Fengmian hid, it wouldn't be easy for the Sea Sword sect to find him again. Stop him! Don't let him go! The Waterside Sword Sea Emperor roared angrily. Several elders of the Waterside Sword sect, who were closest to Chu Fengmian, moved to block Chu Fengmian and used countless martial skills to bombard Chu Fengmian. A bunch of half-step celestial realm experts dare to stop me? Chu Fengmian sneered when he saw the elders coming to block him. With the human emperor's halberd in hand, he could even exchange a few blows with the Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea, let alone these half-step celestial realm elders. Boom! Chu Fengmian swept out with the human emperor's halberd. 7 or 8 elders of the Sea Sword sect, who were blocking Chu Fengmian, were instantly sent flying by the power of the human emperor's halberd. These elders of the Sea Sword sect, who were sent flying, all spat out blood. Obviously, they were seriously injured. However, Chu Fengmian didn't continue to chase after them. The Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea was only temporarily pushed back by the sharpness of the human emperor's halberd. At this moment, he chased after Chu Fengmian again. Go! Tianlong change! Chu Fengmian pushed the escape light to the extreme and dispersed the human emperor's halberd. He suddenly turned into the appearance of the ancestor, Tianlong, and flew out of the Sea Sword sect in an instant. The moment he left the Sea Sword sect, the formation of the Sea Sword sect could no longer affect Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian instantly activated the power of Tianlong change and disappeared from the Sea Sword sect. The Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea chased after him, but he only saw Chu Fengmian's disappearing figure. He had no idea where Chu Fengmian went. Damn it! Pass down my order. All disciples of the Sea Sword sect are to find this person for me. I'm going to grind his bones to dust. The Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea roared angrily. Chu Fengmian, the insignificant Emperor Gu of the Nine Tribulations, sneaked into the Sea Sword sect and took away their sect treasure, the Sword Totem. The Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea was a celestial realm expert, but he couldn't stop Chu Fengmian. How could he swallow this anger? All the disciples of the Sea Sword sect also heard the anger in the Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea's words. They all passed down the order to search for Chu Fengmian. The Sea Sword sect was one of the three major sects of the Songhai Star Zone. As long as Chu Fengmian was still in the Songhai Star Zone, he wouldn't be able to escape their search. This time, I really had a narrow escape. It seems that I can't underestimate a celestial realm expert. If it wasn't for the human emperor's jar, I'm afraid I would have died in the hands of the Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea. Chu Fengmian hid in a remote trench in the Sea of Swords and murmured to himself. His face was extremely pale. He had just used the human emperor's halberd to fight against the Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea, and every move consumed a lot of spiritual power. Even if Chu Fengmian had the Holy Pulse, it couldn't support his current consumption. Chu Fengmian had already used up all his strength to escape. After hiding in the trench for half a day, Chu Fengmian recovered most of his strength. He looked at the human emperor's jar. On the jar of the human emperor, there were some tiny cracks between the fragments. This was the result of the collision between Chu Fengmian's halberd and the Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea. After a few more attacks from the Emperor of the Waterfront Sword Sea, the jar that was formed with great difficulty might break again and scatter into pieces. By then, all of Chu Fengmian's efforts would be in vain. End of chapter.